Welcome, friends. Tonight, we wander into a world shaped not by empires or monuments, but by wind and stone, by song and shadow. A world where the rivers whispered old magic, and the trees remembered the names of gods long forgotten. This is the realm of the Celts, a people whose stories were carried not on paper, but in memory, in ritual, and in the quiet hush of twilight. In this world, creation began not with command, but with chaos and mystery. Powerful beings emerged from mist and myth, radiant gods, ancient tribes, fierce warriors, and creatures both wondrous and strange. The land itself was alive with spirit, and nothing, no hill, no storm, no battle, was ever just what it seemed. Tonight, you'll hear the full tale of Celtic mythology, from the birth of the cosmos, to the rise of the Tuatha De Danann, to the battles that shaped the fate of Ireland and beyond. These are stories of light and shadow, of transformation and trickery, of fate and deep ancestral magic. They are stories that speak not just to history, but to something older still, something buried in the roots of the earth and the echoes of the soul. So settle in, take a slow breath, let the ancient winds guide you, and the voice of the past carry you gently into a world where every stone holds a secret and every legend lingers just beyond the veil. This is the entire story of Celtic mythology explained. Welcome to the journey. The Celtic peoples of ancient Ireland, Wales, and Gaul did not leave us a genesis or a theogony. Theirs was a worldview passed down through the generations by the spoken word of the Druids and the songs of the bards, a tradition that saw the world not as a singular creation, but as an eternal, cyclical process. To seek a linear starting point is to misunderstand the very nature of their universe. The Celtic cosmos was not built. It unfolded, like a fern, in intricate, repeating patterns. Central to this worldview was the concept of balance, not of good versus evil, but of order versus chaos, light versus dark, land versus sea. These were not moral opposites, but necessary, complementary forces that held the universe in a dynamic, creative tension. There was no supreme, benevolent creator, nor a single ultimate source of evil. Instead, power was diffused, residing in the land itself, in ancient beings, and in the eternal struggle and occasional union between opposing factions. The world was a place of constant flux, where today's hero could be tomorrow's tragedy, and today's monster could be the ancestor of tomorrow's god. The structure of their universe was often perceived in triads, the sacred number 3. There were 3 interconnected realms. There was the realm of the sky, the domain of celestial forces and higher knowledge. There was the realm of the sea, representing the vast, mysterious, and often chaotic underworld or abyss. And between them was the realm of the land, our world, the physical plane where these forces met and interacted. This tripartite structure was reflected everywhere, in threefold deities like the goddess Brigid or the Morrigan, in the threefold social structure of druids, warriors, and producers, and in the artistic spirals and triskelions that adorned their metalwork and stone carvings, symbols of eternal motion and the interconnectedness of all things. Unlike many mythologies that place their other worlds in a distant heaven above or a subterranean hell below, the Celtic otherworld was a parallel dimension, existing alongside our own. It was not a destination for the dead in the way we might think of an afterlife, but a timeless, magical realm inhabited by gods, spirits, and ancestors. This other world could could be Tir Nanog, the land of eternal youth, Mag Mel, the plain of delight, or the Welsh Annwn. It was a place where sickness and old age did not exist, where magical cauldrons provided endless feasts, and where a single day could feel like a year in the mortal world. The veil between our world and the other world was thin and permeable. It could be accessed through specific liminal places, ancient burial mounds known as Sithe, caves, mist-shrouded lakes, or islands on the western horizon. The veil also grew especially thin at specific sacred times of the year, particularly the festivals of Samhain and Beltane, when the gates between worlds swung open and gods, fairies, and the spirits of the dead could walk freely among mortals. This belief created a world that was profoundly enchanted. Magic was not a distant, abstract concept, it was a constant, tangible presence woven into the very landscape. A shimmering mist on a lake wasn't just weather, it could be the cloak of a god. A sudden insight wasn't just a thought, it could be the whisper of an ancestor from across the veil. While there is no single pan-Celtic creation myth, the Irish Lebor Gabala Éireann, or the Book of the Taking of Ireland, offers a fascinating substitute. Written by Christian monks in the Middle Ages, it attempts to fit the old pagan myths into a biblical framework, but the ancient stories shine through. It does not describe the creation of the universe, but rather the creation of Ireland itself, through a series of successive invasions by different mythical races. It begins not with an empty void, but with an empty Ireland, a blank slate waiting to be inscribed by the deeds of gods and men. This focus on the land, specifically the sacred island of Ireland, is key. The land was not inert matter. It was alive, a goddess in her own right, and the stories of its settlement were the true genesis of the Irish people. So, how does the Celtic world begin? It doesn't. It is. It is a constant cycle of seasons, a perpetual dance between light and shadow, a world where the magical and the mundane are two sides of the same coin. It is a cosmos where the most profound truths are found in threes, and where the most important journey is not to a distant heaven, but through the mists into the heart of the land itself. To understand what happens next, we must travel to that sacred island, Ireland, and witness the arrival of its first of fated inhabitants.
The First Peoples, the mythical invasions of Ireland. The story of Celtic Ireland is a story of arrivals. It is not a tale of a single people emerging from the soil, but of a sacred island shaped and reshaped by waves of mythical invaders, each bringing their own magic, their own skills, and their own destiny. This grand, sweeping history is chronicled in the Lebor Gabala Éireann, the Book of Invasions. While compiled by medieval Christian monks who tried to link these events to biblical history, the Lebor Gabala is our primary window into the mythic origins of the Irish people. It tells of 6 successive waves of settlement, a foundational epic that populates the island with its gods, its monsters, and its eventual human inhabitants. The very first attempt to settle Ireland, even before the great flood of biblical lore, was led by a woman named Cessair. She was the granddaughter of Noah, who, according to this mythic history, refused her a place on his ark. Undeterred, Cessair built her own idols, sought their advice, and led a group of 50 women and 3 men, her father Bith, the pilot Ladra, and the shrewd Fintin Macbocra, on a great voyage. After years of wandering, they landed in Ireland just 40 days before the flood. Their settlement was short-lived. The men were divided among the women, but soon 2 of them died. The last man, Fintan, overwhelmed by the demands of the remaining women, fled. Heartbroken, Cessair died of grief, and the great flood came and washed the rest of her followers away. All were lost, save one, Fintan. Blessed with the power of shape-shifting, he survived the deluge by transforming into a salmon. He would live for thousands of years, becoming a salmon, an eagle, and a hawk, witnessing all of Ireland's subsequent history and serving as the ultimate repository of its ancient lore. Centuries after the floodwaters receded, the second wave of invaders arrived. This was Partholon and his followers. They came from the east, from Greece or Scythia, and found an Ireland that was mostly a single desolate plain with only 3 lakes and 9 rivers. Partholon was a great builder and farmer. Under his leadership, his people cleared 4 new plains, and 7 new lakes burst forth from the ground. They introduced agriculture, brewing, and the rule of law. They fought and defeated a mysterious, monstrous race known as the Fomorians in the very first battle on Irish soil. For 300 years, the people of Partholon prospered and multiplied until a sudden, devastating plague struck them down. In a single week, they were all wiped out, their bodies buried on a plain that would forever be known as Talacht, the plague grave. The third invasion was led by Nemid, a distant kinsman of Partholon. He and his people also came from the east and found the island empty once more. Like their predecessors, they were industrious, clearing 12 new plains and creating 4 more lakes. But their existence was a hard one. They were constantly oppressed by the Fomorians, the monstrous, sea-dwelling beings of chaos and blight who had returned to claim the island. The Fomorians, led by their tyrannical kings Conan and Mork, demanded a horrific tribute. 2/3 of the children, corn, and milk produced by Nemid's people each year to be delivered on the Festival of Samhain at Conan's Tower on Tory Island. Finally, the people of Nemid rose up in rebellion. They sailed to Tory Island, stormed the tower, and killed Conan. But Mork arrived with a vast fleet of reinforcements, and a terrible battle ensued. Just as the tide of battle turned, a magical tidal wave rose from the sea and drowned nearly everyone on both sides. Only 30 of Nemid's people escaped in a single boat. Their descendants would scatter to the 4 corners of the world, but they were destined to one day return. From this scattered remnant came the next 2 invasions. One group traveled to the northern islands of the world, where they would learn the arts of magic and become the divine Tuatha De Danann. Another group fled to Greece, where they were enslaved and forced to carry soil in bags to fertilize barren mountainsides. From this servitude, they became known as the Fir Bolg, the men of bags. Eventually, the Fir Bolg escaped their slavery and returned to Ireland, becoming the 4th wave of invaders. They were the first to truly organize the island, dividing it into the 5 provinces that would become Ulster, Leinster, Munster, Connacht, and Meath. They established a system of kingship and ruled in relative peace for a generation. But their rule was not to last, for on the 1st of May, the festival of Beltane, a strange dark mist descended upon the land. When it lifted, a new people had arrived, without ships, seemingly from the sky itself. They were tall, beautiful, and skilled in all the arts of magic. They were the descendants of Nemid, who had traveled to the northern islands. They were the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. They had come to claim their ancestral home. The age of proto-historical settlement was over. The age of the gods had begun. The Fir Bolg would have to fight for their kingdom, and beyond them, the shadowy Fomorians still lurked in the depths, waiting to challenge this new, shining power. The stage was set for the great mythical battles that would decide the fate of Ireland.
The Tuatha De Danann, the Shining Ones. When the mist cleared on that fateful Beltane morning, the ruling Fir Bolg looked upon the newcomers with awe and dread. These were not weary refugees or enslaved men seeking a home. These were the Tuatha De Danann,
the people of the goddess Danu, and they carried with them an aura of otherworldly power and light. They were the pantheon of gods and goddesses of pagan Ireland, a race of beings possessing supreme skill, profound wisdom, and mastery over the forces of magic. They did not come to conquer through brute force alone. They came to rule through their inherent superiority in every art and craft, representing the triumph of intellect, culture, and divine order. The origins of the Tuatha Dé Danann lie with the scattered people of Nemed, who, after their defeat by the Fomorians, fled to the northern islands of the world. In these mystical cities, Falius, Gorius, Marius, and Phineus, they spent years learning poetry, magic, and all the hidden knowledge of the cosmos from 4 great druids. When they finally returned to Ireland, they brought this immense learning with them, encapsulated in 4 legendary treasures, one from each city. From the city of Falius, they brought the Lia Fall, the stone of destiny. This great standing stone was said to cry out when the rightful High King of Ireland stood upon it. It was the ultimate symbol of sovereignty, a direct link between the king and the living spirit of the land. From Gorius came an unstoppable, invincible sword which belonged to their king Nuada. From Phineus, they brought the spear of Lug, a magical weapon that thirsted for battle and was so potent it had to be kept in a vat of poppy seed water to keep it from bursting into flame. And from the city of Marius, they brought the most wondrous treasure of all, the cauldron of the Dagda. No company ever went away from this cauldron unsatisfied, for it could produce an endless supply of food, ensuring that the people would never know hunger. These 4 treasures were not just powerful artifacts. They were symbols of the Tuatha Dé Danann's right to rule, representing justice, strength, victory, and prosperity. The members of this divine race were not abstract gods of a single concept, but complex, multifaceted personalities, each a master of multiple domains. Their king upon their arrival was Nuada of the Silver Hand. He was a noble and just ruler, but his destiny was changed forever in the first battle of Mag Tured against the Firbolg, where his arm was severed at the shoulder. According to the laws of the Tuatha Dé, a king had to be physically perfect. Any blemish or disability disqualified him from rule. Though the master physician Dian checked and the craftsman Craidne fashioned him a beautiful, fully articulated arm of silver, he was still forced to abdicate the throne. This adherence to rigid law, even at the cost of a great leader, highlights the Tuatha Dé's commitment to principle and order. The most powerful and beloved of their gods was the Dagda, the good god, not good in a moral sense, but good at everything. He was a father figure, a druid, and a king, portrayed as a large, earthy man of immense power and appetites. He possessed the magical cauldron of plenty, a great club that could kill 9 men with one end and restore them to life with the other, and a magical harp, Uaithne, which could play the 3 strains of music that controlled all emotion: the strain of sorrow that made all weep, the strain of joy that made all laugh, and the strain of sleep that put all to rest. The Dagda was a god of order and abundance, ensuring the seasons turned and the people prospered. Among the goddesses, the most significant was Danu, the great mother goddess from whom they took their name. Though she is a mysterious and seldom mentioned figure, her presence as the ancestral matriarch underpins the entire pantheon. More active were goddesses like Brigid, daughter of the Dagda, a patron of poetry, healing, and smithcraft, and the Morrigan, the great queen or phantom queen, a complex and terrifying goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty, who could change her shape at will. The Tuatha Dé Danann were defined by their skill, or Dan. Each member was a master of some craft. Dian Checht was the god of medicine, whose healing well could restore the dead to life. Goibnu was the master smith, whose magical weapons never missed their mark and inflicted wounds that could not be healed. Creidne was the bronze worker, and Luchta was the carpenter, and together these three were known as the Trí Dé Dána, the three gods of craft, who could arm an entire army in a single night. Ogma was their champion, and the inventor of Ogam, the first system of writing in Ireland. Their arrival in Ireland heralded a new age. They first encountered the resident Firbolg and offered them a choice: battle or half the island to rule as their own. The proud Firbolg chose battle. At the first battle of Mag Tuired, the superior skill and magic of the Tuatha Dé Danann won them the day. They honored their defeated foes, giving them the province of Connacht to live in peace. But a new, darker challenge awaited them. Their victory had attracted the attention of their ancient enemies, the monstrous Fomorians, who saw the Tuatha Dé's blemished king as a sign of weakness and began to assert their tyrannical rule. The Shining Ones, the gods of light and skill, would have to face the forces of darkness and chaos in a final cataclysmic battle for the soul of Ireland.
The Fomorians, chaos, sea, and shadow. For every force of order, there must be a countervailing force of chaos. For every shining god of skill and light, there must be a shadowy figure of raw, untamed power. In the world of Irish myth, this necessary opposition to the cultured Tuatha Dé Danann was embodied by the Fomorians. They are the great antagonists of the Irish mythological cycle, a race of monstrous, often grotesque beings who represent the wild, destructive, and unpredictable forces of nature, particularly the tempestuous sea. The name Fomoriae is ancient, and its meaning is debated by scholars, but it is often interpreted as underdemons or sea giants. They are not simply a race of evil monsters, but a primal elemental power that predates many of the later invaders. They are intrinsically linked with the sea, with blight, with darkness, and with the chaotic potential that exists at the fringes of the civilized world. Their stronghold was said to be on Tory Island, a remote outpost off the coast of Donegal, a perfect symbol of their position on the edge of the known world. The Fomorians are often depicted as physically monstrous. They could be one-eyed, one-armed, and one-legged, or possess the heads of animals, most commonly goats. Their king in the great final battle was Baelor of the Evil Eye. Baelor was a cyclopean terror whose single massive eye, when opened, could wither an entire army with its poisonous, death-dealing gaze. It was so potent that it took 4 men to lift the eyelid with a polished hook. He was the ultimate personification of destructive, chaotic power, a force that negated all life and order. Other prominent Fomorians included Indech, son of the goddess Domnu, the Deep, whose name links them to the abyss, and Ilatha, who, in stark contrast to the others, was described as a beautiful, golden-haired king who appeared from the sea on a silver ship. This highlights one of the most crucial and complex aspects of the Fomorians. Their relationship with the Tuatha Dé Danann was not of simple enmity. The two races were deeply, inextricably intertwined through marriage and blood. They were cosmic rivals, but also family. The Fomorian king Ilatha, for example, had a son with the Tuatha Dé woman Eriu. That son was Bress, who would come to rule the Tuatha Dé Danann for a time. The great god of medicine Dian Keft had a son named Cian, who in turn had a son with Baelor's own daughter, Ethniu. The child of this union was none other than Lug Lamfada, the greatest champion of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the hero destined to defeat his own grandfather Baelor. This intermingling is not just a mythological soap opera, it is profoundly symbolic. It suggests that order and chaos are not separate entities, but are born from one another. The potential for tyranny and destruction, Fomorian traits, exists within the society of the gods, and the potential for heroism and skill,
Tuatha De Danann traits exists within the lineage of the monsters. The great cosmic battle is, in essence, a family feud, a war of cousins for control of the world. The Fomorians' role in the story of Ireland becomes most prominent after the first battle of Mag Tuaird. With the Tuatha De king Nuada disqualified due to the loss of his arm, a new king was needed. In an attempt to placate their Fomorian rivals, the Tuatha De made a fateful decision. They offered the kingship to Bress, the half-Fomorian son of Ilatha. They hoped his dual heritage would bring peace between the two races. The result was a disaster. Bress proved to be a terrible king. He was greedy, inhospitable, and tyrannical. He allowed the Fomorian champions to impose a crushing tax on the Tuatha De, reducing the Shining Gods to servitude. The Dogdeda was forced to build forts for Bress, and Ugma was made to carry firewood. Hospitality, a sacred virtue, was forgotten. When the poet Corpore came to Bress's court, he was given no proper welcome, housed in a tiny dark room with no fire, and served only 3 small dry cakes. In response, Corpore composed the first satire in Irish history, a magical curse that withered Bress's fortunes and caused blisters to appear on his face, another physical blemish that disqualified him for kingship. With Bress deposed, the restored Nuada, now with a silver arm, retook the throne. The Fomorians, led by the fearsome Baelor, saw this as an act of rebellion and declared all-out war. They gathered their monstrous armies, ready to crush the Tuatha De Danann once and for all and impose their dark, chaotic rule over Ireland. The Fomorians represent a necessary and eternal principle. They are the harshness of winter, the blight on the crops, the rage of the storm-tossed sea. They are the forces that challenge civilization, that test the resolve of heroes and gods, and that remind the ordered world of the vast, untamable chaos that surrounds it. Without the threat of the Fomorians, the skills of the Tuatha De Danann would have no purpose. Without the darkness, there could be no appreciation for the light. Their inevitable final conflict would not just be a battle for a piece of land, it would be a war for the very soul of the cosmos, a struggle to determine whether the world would be governed by the skilled hand of the artist or the baleful gaze of the monster.
The Dagda, Father God, harp player, and feaster. In any pantheon, there is often one figure who, while not always the most regal or handsome, embodies a raw, essential, and earthy power. In the Greek pantheon, it might be the lusty Zeus. In the Norse, the one-eyed, wisdom-seeking Odin. Among the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland, this central figure of immense power and prodigious appetite is the Dagda. His name is a title, not a personal name, meaning the good god. This doesn't imply moral goodness, but rather that he is good at everything, a master of all skills, a mighty warrior, and a great king. He is the archetypal father god, a figure of abundance, authority, and primal strength. The Dagda is often depicted not as a shining, ethereal deity, but a large, somewhat rustic, and even comical figure. He is a giant of a man, often dressed in a short, rough tunic that barely covers his backside, dragging behind him a massive wheeled club. But his humble appearance belies his incredible power. He is one of the most important and powerful leaders of the Tuatha De Danann, serving as their chief and king for a time after the great battle against the Fomorians. His power is encapsulated in 3 wondrous treasures, which define his domains of authority. The first of these is his cauldron, known as the Coir Ansesk, the undry cauldron. This magical vessel, one of the 4 great treasures of the Tuatha De, was brought from the mythical city of Murias. It was a cauldron of plenty, a symbol of hospitality and abundance from which no company ever went away hungry.
In a society where a leader's worth was measured by his generosity, the Dagda's cauldron made him the ultimate provider. It ensured the survival and prosperity of his people, representing the fertile power of the earth to produce an endless bounty. His second treasure was his great club, or lorg mor. This weapon was so massive he had to drag it on wheels, leaving a furrow in the earth like a boundary ditch. It was a tool of dual purpose, embodying the cycle of life and death. With one end, the rough end, he could slay 9 men in a single blow. But with the other end, the smooth end, he could touch the slain and restore them to life. This club represents his total authority over existence. He is not just a god of life, but a god who understands and controls its opposite. He is the master of destruction and resurrection, a power that makes him both a fearsome warrior and a life-giving protector. The Dagda's third and perhaps most subtle treasure was his magnificent, richly ornamented harp, named Uafne. In the Celtic world, music was not mere entertainment. It was a magical force that could influence the very fabric of reality. The Dagda's harp could command the emotions of all who heard it. By playing it, he could evoke one of 3 magical strains. The first was the gentre, the strain of joy, which would make everyone laugh and dance with uncontrollable merriment. The second was the goltre, the strain of sorrow, which would cause all to listen to weep with profound sadness. The third and most powerful was the swantre, the strain of sleep, a magical lullaby that could put entire armies into a deep slumber. The harp also had the power to command the seasons, to put them in their proper order. It was a tool of cosmic regulation, ensuring the natural world remained in harmony. The myths surrounding the Dagda often highlight both his immense power and his earthy, sometimes undignified nature. In the build-up to the Second Battle of Mag Tuerd, he goes to the Fomorian camp as an emissary, ostensibly to spy. The Fomorians, mocking his legendary appetite, prepare a vast pit and fill it with an enormous porridge made of milk, flour, fat, and entire carcasses of pigs and goats. They command him to eat it all, or be killed for insulting their hospitality. The Dagda, undaunted, takes up a ladle so large that a man and a woman could lie in its bowl, and consumes the entire thing, scraping the very bottom of the pit clean. Then he lies down to sleep off his gargantuan meal, his belly swollen like a house. While comical, the story demonstrates his connection to abundance and his ability to consume and master the chaotic excesses of his enemies. He is also a figure of great sexual potency, a fertility god whose unions are often with other powerful deities. His most significant liaison is with the Morrigan, the goddess of war. On the eve of the great battle, he meets her as she is bathing in a river. They couple, and this union, known as the marriage of the Dagda, is a sacred act that ensures the Tuatha victory. The god of tribal order and the goddess of battle fury unite, bringing their respective powers into alignment for the coming conflict. He is also the father of many other important gods, including Brigid, the goddess of inspiration, born from his affair with the river goddess Boine, and Midir, the lord of the otherworld stronghold of Bree Leith. The Dagda is the heart of the Tuatha De Danann, the stable center around which the other, more specialized gods revolve. He is the druid who understands magic, the king who provides for his people, the warrior who can destroy and create, and the father whose lineage populates the pantheon. He is the benevolent patriarch, the lord of the feast, and the keeper of cosmic harmony, a comforting and powerful presence ensuring that even in a world of chaos, the cauldron will remain full and the seasons will follow the song of his harp.
The sacred feminine, goddesses and queens. In the patriarchal worlds of many mythologies, goddesses are often relegated to the roles of wives, mothers, or personifications of domestic virtues. But in the world of Celtic myth, female power is a foundational, untamable, and absolutely central force. From the goddesses who are the land itself to the warrior queens who lead armies, the sacred feminine in Celtic lore is a dynamic and formidable presence. These are not passive deities, they are prime movers, shapers of destiny, and sources of sovereignty, embodying the wild, fertile, and often fearsome power of nature and fate. At the very heart of this concept is the sovereignty goddess. In ancient Ireland, the land was not seen as an inanimate territory to be conquered, but as a living, divine female entity. A king could not simply take power through force. He had to be chosen by the land, to be ritually married to her. This marriage was often personified in myth by the king's encounter with a goddess who represented his territory. She might first appear as a hideous, fearsome hag, demanding a kiss or a more intimate union. Only the true and worthy king would have the courage and respect to embrace her. When he did, she would magically transform into a radiantly beautiful young woman, granting him the right to rule and promising that his reign and the land itself would be fertile and prosperous. This motif appears in numerous tales. The great King Niall of the Nine Hostages secures his dynasty's right to rule by embracing the hag of sovereignty. The name of Ireland itself comes from the goddess Eriu, who, along with her sisters Bonba and Fodla, met the invading Milesians and offered them the kingship in exchange for naming the island after them. The land is female, and all legitimate power flows from her. This gives female figures an immense foundational power that underpins the entire political and spiritual landscape. This divine female power is embodied in the great goddesses of the Tuatha Dé Danann. There is Danu, the Great Mother, from whom the entire pantheon takes its name. There is the beloved Brigid, the triple goddess of the sacred fire of creativity. And then there is the Morrigan, the Great Queen, a terrifying and magnificent figure who embodies the most fearsome aspects of female power. As a triple goddess of war and fate, she is not a follower, but a leader. She chooses who lives and who dies on the battlefield. She offers her love and power to heroes, and she brings ruin upon those who scorn her. Her union with the Dagda is a meeting of equals, a necessary alliance between the god of tribal order and the goddess of sovereign, chaotic power, without which the gods could not win their greatest battle. This tradition of powerful women extends from the divine to the mortal realm in the form of formidable queens and warrior women. The most famous of these is Queen Med of Connacht, the driving force behind the epic Tain Bo Cuailnge. Med is no passive monarch. She is a fierce, ambitious, and sexually liberated ruler who leads her own armies and takes many husbands and lovers, declaring that she only desires a man who is without jealousy, fear, or meanness. Her quest for the brown bull of Cooley is driven by her refusal to be even slightly less wealthy or powerful than her husband, Ailill. Though she is often portrayed as the antagonist, she is a figure of immense agency and power, a mortal woman who embodies the same kind of sovereign authority as a goddess. The tradition of the female warrior is also strong. In the Ulster cycle, the hero Cuchulainn learns his martial skills not from a man, but the warrior woman Scáthach, the shadowy one, who runs a military academy in Scotland. Scáthach is the master of arms, a formidable fighter who trains the greatest heroes of her age. Her rival, and sometimes ally, is another warrior queen named Aoife, whom Cuchulainn must defeat in single combat. Their encounter results in a son, highlighting the common theme of powerful women being both lovers and adversaries to the male heroes. Even in tragedy, Celtic women display immense power and agency. Deirdre of the Sorrows is not a passive victim. She actively chooses her love, Naishi, and persuades him to flee with her, defying a king and a prophecy. Her eventual suicide is not an act of weakness, but a final, defiant act of will, choosing death over a life of dishonor under the king who murdered her beloved. Rhiannon, in the Welsh Mabinogion, endures a humiliating and unjust punishment with a quiet, powerful dignity, never losing her noble bearing. These are not damsels in distress. They are women of immense fortitude, whose choices drive the narrative and whose suffering has profound consequences. This powerful sacred feminine is a defining characteristic of Celtic mythology. It reflects a worldview that saw the earth as a mother, that understood power as flowing from both male and female sources, and that was not afraid to depict women as complex beings who could be nurturing healers like Brigid, formidable rulers like Med, or terrifying arbiters of fate like the Morrigan. They are the land, the law, and the lore, and without them, the world of the Celts would be bereft of its deepest magic and its most powerful truths.
The Morrigan, goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty. In the mists of the battlefield, a raven circles overhead, its cry a chilling prophecy of the slaughter to come. By the river ford, a lone woman washes blood-stained armor, her silent work a grim omen for the warrior who is about to cross. This is the domain of the Morrigan, one of the most powerful, enigmatic, and terrifying figures in all of Celtic mythology. Her name is often translated as Great Queen or Phantom Queen, and she is far more than a simple goddess of war. She is a multifaceted deity of fate, death, prophecy, and sovereignty, a shape-shifting force of nature whose presence signals a turning point in the destiny of gods and heroes alike. The Morrigan is rarely depicted as a single entity. More often, she's a three-goddess, a trinity of powerful, interconnected sisters who can act both independently and as a single being. The three goddesses most commonly associated with this triad are Bodb, Macha, and Nemain, though sometimes Anand or the Morrigan herself is named as one of the three. Bodb, whose name means crow or vulture, is the aspect that instills panic and confusion in armies. She flies over the battlefield as a crow, her shrieks causing soldiers to drop their weapons and flee in terror. Nemain means frenzy or venomous, and she embodies the berserker rage and madness of war. Macha, a name with deep connections to horses and the plains, is a powerful sovereignty goddess in her own right, linked to the land and the authority of kings. Together, they are the Morrigan, the collective force that governs the bloody business of conflict. Her primary role is not to fight in the conventional sense, but to influence the outcome of battles through magic, prophecy, and psychological warfare. She is the ultimate psychopomp, a figure who presides over the passage from life to death. One of her most iconic manifestations is as the Washer at the Ford. A hero on his way to a fateful battle might encounter a woman weeping as she washes a pile of bloody clothes and armor in a river. If he is brave enough to ask, she will reveal that it is his own armor she is washing, and that he is fated to die that day. She does not cause the death, she foresees and announces it, an implacable herald of doom. The Morrigan is a master shapeshifter, able to appear as a beautiful young woman, a fearsome old hag, or, most famously, a raven or crow. These birds, as scavengers of the battlefield, were seen as her sacred animals, living embodiments of her presence. To see a crow before a battle was to see the Morrigan herself, watching, waiting, and choosing the slain. Her ability to change form makes her unpredictable and terrifying. She can be an ally, a seductress, or a destroyer, and it is often difficult to know which aspect one is dealing with. Her relationship with the Dagda is one of mutual respect and power. On the eve of the Second Battle of Mag Tured, their union ensures victory for the Tuatha De Danann. By coupling with the Dagda, the sovereign power of the land, the Morrigan, willingly gives her favor to the forces of divine order, the Dagda, sanctifying their cause. After their union, she promises to use her magic to weaken the Fomorian king, Indech, by draining the blood from his heart and taking the kidneys of his valor. She also delivers a powerful prophecy, first of victory for the Tuatha De Danann, and then a darker, more distant prophecy of the eventual end of the world, an age of strife and decay. Her most famous and complex relationship, however, is with the mortal hero Cuchulainn, the great champion of the Ulster cycle. Their interactions are a dramatic dance of desire, rejection, and revenge. She first appears to him as a beautiful, noble woman and offers her her love, her aid in battle, and the bounty of her herds. Cuchulainn rashly and foolishly rejects her, claiming he has no time for women amidst his duties. This is a fatal mistake. By rejecting the Morrigan, he is rejecting the very power of sovereignty and fate. Scorned, the Morrigan vows to hinder him at the most critical moments of his great duel against Loch at the climax of the Tan Bo Cuailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley. She attacks him in three forms. First, she appears as an eel and trips him in the ford. He breaks her ribs. Then she becomes a great she-wolf and stampedes cattle towards him. He shatters her eye-stone with a sling. Finally, she transforms into a hornless red heifer at the head of a stampede. He breaks her leg. Despite her interference, Cuchulainn wins his duel, but he is grievously wounded. Later, the Morrigan appears to him as an old, one-eyed, one-legged, one-armed hag milking a cow. She offers him 3 drinks of milk. With each drink he accepts, he utters a blessing, and with each blessing, one of her wounds is healed. In this moment, Cuchulainn unwittingly restores the goddess he had injured. This complex interaction shows that their relationship is not simple antagonism. Even in her opposition, she seems to be testing him, and he, in his ignorance, both harms and heals her. Ultimately, however, her prophecy for him is death. As he rides to his final battle, she appears as the washer at the ford, cleaning his bloody armor. He knows his doom is upon him, but he rides on. After he is mortally wounded, he ties himself to a standing stone so he can die on his feet, facing his enemies. No one dares approach him until a crow, the Morrigan herself, lands on his shoulder, a final clear sign that the great hero is truly dead. The Morrigan is the wild, untamable heart of Celtic mythology. She is the fury of battle, the sovereignty of the land, and the chilling voice of fate. She is not good or evil. She is a fundamental force of the cosmos, a reminder that life is interwoven with death, and that even the greatest heroes cannot escape the destiny whispered on the raven's wing.
Lugh, the long arm of light. As the tyranny of the Fomorians tightened its grip on the Tuatha De Danann and their deposed king Bress drove them into servitude, a sense of despair began to settle over the shining gods. Their king, Nuada, though restored, was still scarred. Their champion, the Dagda, was reduced to building forts. They were a people of immense skill, yet they were oppressed. What they needed was not just a warrior, but a savior,
a figure who could unite all of their talents, a leader who could outthink, outcraft, and outfight the chaotic darkness of their enemies. That savior arrived at the gates of Terra in the form of a brilliant youthful stranger named Lugh. Lugh's very existence is a testament to the intertwined nature of the gods and their Fomorian foes. He was the son of Cian of the Tuatha De Danann and Ethniu, the daughter of the Fomorian tyrant Balor of the Evil Eye. This union was a direct defiance of a prophecy that foretold Balor would be killed by his own grandson. To prevent this, Balor had locked his only daughter, Ethniu, in a high tower on Tory Island. But Cian, with the help of a druidess, managed to reach her. Lugh was the result of their union. He was spirited away and fostered by the sea god Manannán mac Lir and the great queen Tailtiu, learning all the arts of war, magic, and kingship. Lugh's dramatic arrival is one of the most iconic scenes in Irish myth. He came to the royal court at Tara, where King Nuada was holding a great feast. The doorkeeper stopped him, stating that no one could enter Tara unless they were a master of a specific art or craft. Lugh asked if they had a smith. The doorkeeper said yes, Gobinio. Lugh asked if they had a carpenter, a champion, a harper, a hero, a poet, a historian, a sorcerer, a physician, a cupbearer. To each question, the doorkeeper replied that they already had a master of that art within. Finally, Lugh issued his great challenge. He asked, "Do you have any one man who possesses all of these skills together?" The doorkeeper was forced to admit they did not. Lugh was the Samel Danach, the equally skilled in all the arts. News of this extraordinary youth reached King Nuada, who sent his best chess player to challenge him. Lugh won every game. Nuada then summoned Lugh inside, and amazed by his prowess, gave him the throne of Tara for 13 days. During this time, Lugh organized the Tuatha De Danann, assessing their strengths and planning their strategy for the coming war. His arrival was like a ray of light, breathing new life and hope into the oppressed gods. Lugh was not just a strategist, he was a master warrior. His title, Lamfada, means of the long arm, a name that could refer to his skill with a spear or sling, or his far-reaching power and influence. He possessed several magical weapons, including the invincible spear from the city of Phineas, which he had to tame, and a sling stone that would become the instrument of his greatest victory. The climax of Lugh's story is the Second Battle of Mug Tuired, the final apocalyptic confrontation between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians. Lugh, having taken command from Nuada, led the gods into battle. The fighting was fierce, and losses were heavy on both sides. The smith, Gobinio, the carpenter, Luchta, and the bronze worker, Credni, worked tirelessly to repair and forge new weapons, while the physician Dian Kecht, healing well, restored the wounded and slain Tuatha De to fight again. But the Fomorians had a secret weapon, the devastating gaze of their king Balor of the Evil Eye. As the tide of battle ebbed and flowed, Balor called for his attendants to lift his giant eyelid. The Tuatha De Danann knew that whichever of their battalions he looked upon would be annihilated. At that critical moment, Lugh raced to the front line. As the great poisonous eye opened, Lugh took his sling stone and cast it with incredible force and perfect accuracy. The stone struck Balor's eye, driving it back through his skull so that its death-dealing gaze fell on the Fomorian army behind him, wreaking havoc in their own ranks. The Fomorian king was dead, slain by his own grandson, as the prophecy had foretold. With Balor's fall, the Fomorian resistance crumbled. The Tuatha De Danann were victorious, and the forces of chaos were driven back into the sea. Lugh's victory was not just one of brute force, it was a victory of skill over brute strength, of light over darkness, of multifaceted genius over one-dimensional destruction. After the battle, Lugh found the defeated Fomorian king Bress and spared his life in exchange for the secrets of agriculture. when to plow, when to sow, and when to reap. This act solidified the Tuatha De Danann's mastery over the land, adding the final piece of knowledge needed for a prosperous society. Lugh became the High King of Ireland and ruled for 40 years in a golden age of peace and prosperity. He established the Lugnasad festival in honor of his foster mother Taltu, a great harvest celebration held on the 1st of August. Lugh is the quintessential Celtic hero god, a master of all trades, a uniter of his people, a bringer of light, and a slayer of giants. He represents the ideal of a complete individual whose power comes not from a single overwhelming attribute, but from the balanced mastery of all the skills that make a civilization great.
Celtic mythology through Christianity. Hidden gods, new saints. The arrival of Christianity in the Celtic lands, beginning most famously with St. Patrick's mission to Ireland in the 5th century, marked a profound turning point in their history. It was a moment of immense cultural and spiritual change, but it was not the swift and total eradication of the old pagan beliefs that one might imagine. Instead, what unfolded over centuries was a complex and fascinating process of syncretism, adaptation, and reinterpretation. The old gods were not simply forgotten, they were transformed. They put on new masks, hid within the stories of new saints, and were woven into the very fabric of the new faith, creating a uniquely Celtic form of Christianity that echoes with the magic of the pagan past. The key to this process lies with the individuals who wrote down the myths, the early Irish monks. These men were devout Christians, yet they were also scholars with a deep love for their own native culture and its rich oral traditions. They faced a dilemma: how to preserve the epic stories of their ancestors without validating the pagan gods they featured. Their solution was ingenious. They didn't erase the gods, they demoted them. In the chronicles they composed, such as the Lebor Gabala Eren, the Tuatha De Danann are no longer presented as gods in the religious sense. Instead, they are historicized, reframed as a race of ancient, magical, but ultimately mortal kings and queens who ruled Ireland in a distant, pre-Christian past. They are powerful sorcerers and great heroes, but not deities to be worshipped. Lugh is a great king, the Dagdar a powerful chieftain, but their divinity is carefully stripped away. After their defeat by the mortal Milesians, they do not die, but retreat into the hollow hills to become the Ails Siddi, the people of the mounds, the powerful but diminished fairy folk of later lore. This allowed the monks to record their stories while fitting them into a Christian historical framework that began with the biblical creation. An even more direct form of syncretism was the transformation of pagan deities into Christian saints. The most striking example of this is the goddess Bridget. As the beloved triple goddess of healing, poetry, and the forge, her cult was so deeply ingrained in the Irish psyche that it could not be easily uprooted. So she was reborn as Saint Bridget of Kildare. The new saint shared the goddess's name, her feast day of February 1st, the pagan festival of Imbolc, and many of her attributes. Saint Bridget's miracles often involved fire, healing, and providing endless food, just like her pagan predecessor. The perpetual sacred flame kept at her monastery in Kildare was a direct continuation of the pagan practice of tending a sacred fire in the goddess's honor. Through this process, the worship of Bridget was able to continue, safely cloaked in a Christian mantle. Other gods were less fortunate. Figures who couldn't be easily saint-washed were often demonized. The horned god Cernunnos from Gaul, a deity of nature, fertility, and the wilderness, with his antlered head, was an easy target for Christian writers looking for a visual model for the devil. The shadowy, often frightening aspects of the otherworld were reinterpreted as hell or the domain of demons.
The Aseeth, once powerful gods, slowly became the often mischievous, sometimes dangerous, but ultimately less threatening fairies of folklore. Their power diminished and their nature made more capricious. The heroic sagas were also reinterpreted through a Christian lens. While the core stories of Cuchulainn and the Táin were preserved with remarkable fidelity, later scribes would sometimes add Christian glosses or episodes. A famous addition to the story of the pagan king Concobar Magnessa claims that he died of rage on hearing of Christ's crucifixion, his druids having explained the cosmic disturbance to him. This anachronistic tale attempts to baptize the pagan hero, making him a righteous, albeit unknowing, Christian. Similarly, the story of Oisian's return from Tir na Og often ends with him meeting St. Patrick. Their long dialogues pit the values of the heroic pagan past against the new Christian faith, with Oisian defiantly defending the glory of Fionn and Fianna, while Patrick promises salvation through Christ. These stories are a fascinating record of a culture in transition, grappling with the tension between its past and its future. Even the landscape, once sacred to pagan gods, was reconsecrated. Holy wells once dedicated to goddesses like Brigid became associated with the Virgin Mary or local saints. Standing stones and sacred groves, once the sites of druidic ritual, had crosses carved into them or churches built nearby. This was a way of claiming the spiritual power of a place for the new religion, absorbing its pre-existing sanctity rather than trying to destroy it. This process of absorption and transformation is why so much of Celtic mythology survived. Unlike in many other parts of Europe, where paganism was more brutally suppressed, Irish Christianity found a way to make peace with its own past. The monks who picked up their quills to write down the tales of the Tuatha De Danann and the Fianna became the unlikely saviours of the very mythology their religion had displaced. They preserved a world of magic, honour and sorrow, allowing the voices of the old gods to echo through the centuries, forever entwined with the ringing of the saints' bells.
Brigid, goddess of healing, poetry, and the forge. Not all divine power in the Celtic world was expressed through the thunder of battle or the decree of kings. There was another kind of power, a sacred fire of creativity and renewal that burned at the very heart of the culture. This was the fire of inspiration, the fire of the forge, and the fire of healing, and it was embodied in one of the most beloved and enduring of all Celtic deities, the goddess Brigid. Daughter of the great Dagda, Brigid was a multifaceted goddess whose gentle yet immense power touched every aspect of life, from the creation of a poem to the birth of a lamb. Like many Celtic deities, Brigid is a triple goddess, though her triplicity is not one of different personas, but of three interconnected functions. She was Brigid the poet, Brigid the healer, and Brigid the smith. This triad represents the three pillars of a sophisticated society: the intellectual and spiritual power of the word, the vital power of physical well-being, and the practical power of craftsmanship and technology. She was not a goddess of one thing, but of the sacred fire that fuels all creative and transformative processes. As the goddess of poetry and inspiration, Brigid was the patron of the Fili, the esteemed class of poets and seers in Irish society. Poetry was not mere verse, it was a magical art, a way of channeling divine truth and shaping reality through the power of language. A poet's praise could elevate a king, while their satire could bring him ruin. Brigid's divine breath, the imbas foros nai, or knowledge that illuminates, was the source of this inspiration. She was the muse who whispered in the ear of the bard, who blessed the historian with clear memory, and who guided the judge to a wise decision. Her first great cry in the world, upon her birth, was said to have been heard throughout Ireland, a symbol of the profound and far-reaching power of the spoken word. As the goddess of healing, Brigid presided over medicine, childbirth, and the care of the sick. She was a gentle, nurturing force, a guardian of hearth and home. Wells and springs were sacred to her, their waters believed to have powerful healing properties. People would travel to her sacred wells, leaving offerings of cloth or small tokens known as cluties tied to nearby trees, in the hopes of receiving her blessing and being cured of their ailments. She was particularly associated with livestock and the fertility of the herds, especially ewes, as her festival coincided with the beginning of the lambing season. She was the protector of the family and the community, a divine midwife who ensured the continuation of life. As the goddess of the forge, she was the mistress of fire and metal. She was the patron of the smith, one of the most respected and magically potent figures in Celtic society. The smith's ability to transform raw ore from the earth into a sharp blade, a sturdy plowshare, or a beautiful piece of jewelry was seen as a powerful form of alchemy. This was Brigid's fire at work, the fire of transformation, which takes one substance and, through heat and skill, turns it into something new, powerful, and useful. This aspect connects her to technology, invention, and the practical arts that underpin civilization. Brigid's great festival was Imbolc, celebrated on the 1st of February. It was one of the 4 major fire festivals of the Celtic year, marking the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Imbolc means in the belly, referring to the pregnancy of the ewes, and it was a festival of purification and returning light. It celebrated the first stirrings of spring, the promise that the harshness of winter was breaking. On the eve of Imbolc, people would leave out food and drink for Brigid, as she was believed to walk the earth that night, blessing the homes and the people within. They would craft Brigid's crosses from rushes, a distinctive 4-armed symbol that was hung over doorways to protect the home from fire and evil. Young girls would create a bridiog, or little doll of Brigid, and carry it from house to house, receiving gifts and good wishes. It was a time of hope, renewal, and a cleansing of the old to make way for the new. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Brigid's legacy is her seamless transformation in the Christian era. Unlike many pagan gods who were demonized or forgotten, Brigid was so deeply loved and her attributes so closely aligned with positive virtues that she was absorbed into Christianity as one of Ireland's most prominent saints, Saint Brigid of Kildare. This story of Saint Brigid mirrors those of the goddess in incredible ways. Saint Brigid was the daughter of a druid. She founded a monastery at Kildare, which means Church of the Oak, on a site that was likely a former pagan sanctuary. This monastery housed a perpetual sacred flame, tended by 19 nuns for centuries, a clear continuation of the pagan tradition of honoring the goddess's sacred fire. Saint Brigid's miracles often involve healing, providing endless supplies of food and drink, much like the Dagda's cauldron, and a deep connection to animals and nature. Her feast day is February 1st, the same day as the festival of Imbolc. This syncretism is a testament to the enduring power of Brigid's archetype. Whether seen as a goddess or a saint, she represents the sacred fire of life itself. She is the creative spark, the nurturing warmth, and the transformative flame. Her legacy is not of epic battles or tragic destinies, but of the quiet, constant, and essential work of healing, creating, and inspiring. A gentle but unquenchable light that has burned brightly in the heart of Celtic spirituality for thousands of years.
The Second Battle of Mag Tuired, War of the Gods. All the stories, all the rivalries, and all the prophecies of the Irish mythological cycle lead to this one cataclysmic event, the Second Battle of Mag Tuired. More than just a clash of armies, this was a cosmic war, a final, definitive struggle between the forces of divine order and the forces of chaotic blight. On one side stood the Tuatha De Danann, the gods of skill, poetry, and light, fighting for their very survival and their right to rule the land. On the other stood the Fomorians, the monstrous sea giants of darkness and tyranny, determined to crush the shining gods and drag Ireland back into an age of oppression. This was not a war of good versus evil, but a war for the very nature of existence. The seeds of the conflict were sown when the Tuatha De king, Nuada, lost his arm in their first battle against the Fir Bolg. His physical blemish forced him to abdicate, and in a disastrous attempt at diplomacy, the kingship was given to Bress, whose father was a Fomorian king. Bress's rule was a catastrophe. He was a greedy, inhospitable tyrant who starved his people and insulted their poets. When he was finally deposed and Nuada was restored, now with a new magical silver arm, the Fomorians saw it as a declaration of war. They amassed a colossal army under the command of their most fearsome champion, Balor of the Evil Eye, and demanded an exorbitant tribute from the Tuatha De, who now had no choice but to fight. It was into this tense atmosphere that the young hero Lugh arrived at the court of Tara. His mastery of every art and skill, the Samil Danak, made him the perfect leader for a war that would be won not just by strength, but by intelligence and craft. Lugh took command and began to organize the Tuatha De for the coming battle. He questioned each of the gods of craft. What contribution could they make? Gobivnu the smith promised to forge lances that would always hit their mark, and swords that would never break. Creidne the artificer promised to supply all the rivets for the lances and hilts for the swords. Luchta the wright promised to cut all the spear shafts and shield boards. Dian Kekt the physician promised that any warrior wounded or even slain could be restored to fight the next day by being dipped into his magical healing well, the Sline. The Dagda promised to wield his mighty club and use his druidic magic against the enemy. The Morrigan promised to use her sorcery to sow confusion and fear among the Fomorian ranks. It was a mobilization of every talent the Tuatha De possessed. The two great armies finally met on the plains of Mag Tuired, or the Plain of Pillars. The battle raged for days. It was a brutal, grinding affair. Each day, the Tuatha De warriors who fell were restored in Dian Kekt's well, while Gubivnu and his fellow craftsmen tirelessly resupplied the army with magical weapons. The Fomorians, seeing this, sent a spy to sabotage the well, filling it with stones and destroying the Tuatha De's greatest advantage. The losses now became permanent and devastating. King Nuada himself was slain by Balor of the Evil Eye. The turning point of the battle came when Balor, the Fomorians' ultimate weapon, entered the fray. He was a walking engine of destruction. His single venomous eye, when opened, could destroy an entire army. As his attendants began to lift the heavy eyelid with a hook, a sense of doom fell over the Tuatha De. At this moment, that Lugh, who had been held in reserve, unleashed his full power. He began to chant a powerful spell, hopping on one foot and closing one eye in a magical posture, and circled the battlefield.
As Balor's deadly eye opened, Lugh took up his sling and cast a stone with supernatural force and accuracy. The stone struck Balor's eye with such power that it was driven back through his head. The eye's destructive gaze was turned inward, upon the Fomorian army itself, annihilating thousands of their own warriors. Balor, the great tyrant, fell dead, slain by his prophesied grandson. With the death of their king and the loss of their greatest weapon, the Fomorian morale shattered. The Tuatha De Danann surged forward, led by the Dagda and Lugh, and routed their enemies completely, driving them back into the sea from whence they came. The battle was won. Order had triumphed over chaos. Skill had defeated brute force. In the aftermath, the victors surveyed the field. They had won, but at a great cost. The Dagda recovered his stolen harp from the fleeing Fomorians and played the three magical strains, the sorrowful strain for their losses, the joyful strain for their victory, and the peaceful strain of sleep to bring rest to the weary. Lugh spared the life of the captured Fomorian king in exchange for the secrets of agriculture, ensuring the future prosperity of the land. The Second Battle of Mag Turid is the central epic of the Tuatha De Danann. It is their defining moment, their validation of their entire way of being. It is a story that celebrates not just martial prowess, but the collective power of a society where every skill, the smith, the poet, the healer, the king, is valued and necessary for survival. The victory secured the golden age of the gods in Ireland, a long period of peace and prosperity under the wise rule of King Lugh. But even in their moment of triumph, the prophecies of the Morrigan hinted at a future time when this order would once again decay and the world would fall into darkness, a reminder that in the Celtic worldview, no victory is ever truly final.
The Celtic Otherworld, Tir na Og, and realms beyond. Where do we go when we die? What lies beyond the veil of the world we know? For the ancient Celts, the answer was not a distant heaven in the sky or a fiery hell deep in the earth. Their afterlife, or more accurately, their otherworld, was a place far more mysterious, beautiful, and immediate. It was a parallel dimension, a magical realm that existed alongside our own, sometimes visible in the shimmering haze of a summer afternoon or the deep mists of a sacred lake. This was not a place of judgment, but a land of eternal youth, feasting, and adventure, a paradise that was tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far away. The Celtic otherworld goes by many names, each revealing a different facet of its nature. In Irish myth, it is most famously known as Tir na Og, the land of youth, where no one ever grows old or sick. It is also called Mag Mell, the plain of delight, and Emon Ablach, the fortress of apples, suggesting a connection to the magical, life-giving fruit found in many mythologies. In Welsh lore, it is Anwen, a beautiful but mysterious realm whose ruler Eran once traded places with the mortal hero Pwyll. Unlike the grim underworlds of other cultures, the Celtic otherworld is almost always depicted as a place of breathtaking beauty. It is an idyllic landscape of flowering plains, sweet-singing birds, and trees with silver branches and golden apples. The weather is always perfect, and the feasts are endless, served from magical cauldrons that never dry up. Time itself behaves differently there. A year in the otherworld might be a single day in the mortal world, where a day there might be a century here. This temporal distortion is a common feature in tales of mortals who venture into these realms. Entry into the otherworld was not something that happened to everyone upon death. It was not the default destination for the soul. Instead, it was a place one could journey to, either by invitation or by stumbling upon one of its hidden entrances. These gateways were liminal places, thresholds between the worlds. They could be ancient burial mounds, known in Ireland as She, pronounced she, which were believed to be the underground palaces of the Tuatha De Danann after they were driven from the surface. They could be hidden caves, wells, or islands that appeared and disappeared in the Western Sea. The most common way for a mortal to reach the otherworld was by being invited by one of its inhabitants. Often, a beautiful, otherworldly woman would appear to a mortal hero, singing of the wonders of her homeland and beckoning him to join her. She might carry a silver branch of an apple tree that produced enchanting music, a symbol of her magical realm. If the hero agreed, he would sail with her to the west, vanishing from the mortal world forever. The story of Oisin, son of the great hero Finn Macumil, is the most famous tale of this kind. He fell in love with the fairy woman Niam of the golden hair and traveled with her to Tir na Og. He lived there in bliss for what felt like only 3 years, but when a wave of homesickness prompted him to return to Ireland for a visit, Niam warned him not to let his feet touch the soil. He returned to find that 300 years had passed, his friends and family were long dead, and the land was utterly changed. When he accidentally fell from his horse, his feet touched the Irish earth, and the weight of 3 centuries instantly fell upon him, turning him into a withered, ancient man. The otherworld was also the dwelling place of the gods. After the Tuatha De Danann were defeated by the final wave of invaders, the mortal Milesians, the ancestors of the Irish people, they did not die or leave. They retreated into the otherworld, dwelling inside the hollow hills and fairy mounds. From there they became the Aes She, the people of the mounds, the beings who would later be known in folklore as the fairies or the good people. They continued to interact with the mortal world, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, and always maintaining their magical hidden kingdom just beyond human sight. The otherworld could also be a place of trial and initiation for heroes. In Welsh myth, Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, stumbles into the otherworld of Anwen and befriends its king Aron. They agree to switch places for a year and a day, a test of Pwyll's honor and courage that ultimately forges a powerful bond between the two realms. The hero Bronn the Blessed leads an expedition to the otherworld to retrieve a magical cauldron, a perilous quest that costs him dearly. These stories portray the otherworld not just as a paradise, but as a source of wisdom, power, and danger. It's important to note that this beautiful, timeless realm was not the only destination for the dead. The myths are more ambiguous about the fate of ordinary people. Some may have gone to a darker, more shadowy underworld, a place of silent waiting. Others may have been reincarnated, their souls reborn into a new body to live another life. The idea of reincarnation is a strong undercurrent in many Celtic tales, such as the story of the hero Mongan, who is said to be a rebirth of Finn Macumil. The Celtic otherworld is a reflection of a deeply spiritual and enchanted worldview. It speaks to a belief in a reality that is multi-layered, where the sacred is not separate from the mundane, but interwoven with it. It is a place of eternal beauty and wonder, a reminder that just beyond the world we can see, there lies a land of magic, music, and endless youth, waiting in the Western Sea or dreaming beneath the hollow hills.
The role of druids, mystics, judges, and keepers of lore. In the heart of Celtic society, standing at the nexus of the spiritual and temporal worlds, were the druids. Shrouded in mystery and often sensationalized by later Roman accounts, the druids were far more than the white-robed, sickle-wielding figures of popular imagination. They were the intellectual and spiritual elite of the Celtic peoples, a highly trained and deeply respected class of priests, judges, philosophers, scientists, and keepers of the sacred lore. In a society without writing, they were the living libraries of their people, the guardians of the myths, laws, and histories that held their world together. The word druid
is believed to derive from roots meaning oak knower or deep knowledge, pointing to their profound connection with nature, particularly the sacred oak tree, and their role as masters of wisdom. According to Roman writers like Julius Caesar, who provided some of our only contemporary, albeit biased, accounts, the Druids held immense power and authority. They were exempt from taxes and military service, and their influence transcended tribal boundaries. A Druid's decree could halt a battle in its tracks, as no warrior would dare to disobey their sacred authority. Their training was incredibly long and arduous, lasting up to 20 years. All of their knowledge, the vast genealogies, the complex legal codes, the thousands of verses of poetry and myth, the secrets of divination and natural philosophy, had to be committed to memory. This oral tradition was not a limitation. It was a deliberate choice. It ensured that the knowledge remained sacred and secret, accessible only to those who had undergone the rigorous initiation. It also made the Druid himself the vessel of that knowledge, a living embodiment of his culture's wisdom. The Druids served several critical functions in society. First and foremost, they were the priests, the intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. They presided over all public and private sacrifices and rituals, interpreting the will of the gods through the observation of natural phenomena, the flight of birds, or, as the Romans grimly reported, the death throes of sacrificial victims. They determined the sacred calendar, marking the auspicious times for festivals, for planting, and for war. Their understanding of the cosmos was not based on blind faith, but on a deep philosophical inquiry into the nature of the soul, the stars, and the universe. Caesar noted their primary teaching was that the soul does not perish, but passes after death from one body to another, a clear belief in reincarnation that shaped the Celts' fearless attitude towards death. Secondly, the Druids were the judges and lawmakers of their people. They presided over all disputes, both public and private, from murder cases to inheritance claims. Their authority was absolute. If any individual or tribe refused to abide by their decision, the Druids could impose the most severe penalty, excommunication. The person would be banned from all sacrifices, shunned by the entire community, and stripped of all legal rights and honor. In a society built on kinship and reputation, this was a fate worse than death. This judicial power gave the Druids immense social control, allowing them to maintain order and cohesion across disparate tribes. Thirdly, they were the educators and advisors. They were the teachers of the noble youth, passing down the traditions and values of their culture. They were also the trusted counselors to kings and chieftains. No king would make a major decision, whether to go to war, forge an alliance, or enact a new law, without first consulting his druid. The druid's ability to perform divination and interpret omens was considered essential for successful leadership. In Irish myth, the great king Conchobar mac Nessa would not speak before his 3 druids had spoken first. The archdruid Cathbad could foretell the future of a child based on the time of their birth, a power that shaped the tragic destiny of the hero Cuchulainn and the beautiful Deirdre of the Sorrows. In the myths, the druid Mogruth creates a magical storm, while the druids of the Tuatha Dé Danann use their powers to defeat their enemies in battle. Their magic was rooted in their profound knowledge of the natural world and their connection to the other world. With the arrival of the Romans in Gaul and Britain, and later the spread of Christianity in Ireland, the power of the Druids began to wane. The Romans saw them as a source of political resistance and brutally suppressed them.
The Christians, with their own written scripture and organized clergy, supplanted the Druids as the spiritual authorities. The old priests were either converted, their roles transformed into those of early Christian saints and monks, or they were marginalized and their practices driven into the shadows, eventually becoming the stuff of folklore. Despite their eventual decline, the legacy of the Druids is immense. They were the intellectual glue that held the Celtic world together. They cultivated a sophisticated system of law, a deep reverence for the natural world, and a rich, complex oral literature that forms the very basis of Celtic mythology. Though much of their specific doctrine is lost to time, their spirit lives on in the myths they preserved. Tales of a world alive with magic, governed by cycles, and understood by those with the wisdom to listen to the sacred oak.
Sacred time, Samhain, Beltane, and the Celtic year. For the ancient Celts, time was not a linear progression of identical days, but a living, breathing cycle, marked by moments of profound spiritual significance. The turning of the seasons was not just an agricultural reality, it was a cosmic drama, a dance between the forces of light and darkness, growth and decay. This rhythm was celebrated through 4 great fire festivals, which divided the year into quarters. These were not simply holidays, they were sacred hinges in the year, moments when the veil between our world and the other world grew thin, and the laws of time and space were temporarily suspended. The 2 most important of these festivals were Samhain and Beltane. They represented the 2 great turning points of the Celtic year, dividing it into a dark half and a light half. Samhain, celebrated on the 1st of November, marked the beginning of winter and the dark half of the year. Its name likely means summer's end. This was a time of immense supernatural power and dread. It was the end of the harvest season, when the herds were brought in from the fields and the final preparations for the long, cold winter were made. But more importantly, Samhain was the Celtic New Year, a point that existed outside of time itself. On the night of Samhain, the barriers between the worlds dissolved completely. The portals of the Shida, the fairy mounds, swung open, and the spirits of the dead, along with gods, fairies, and all manner of otherworldly beings, could walk freely among the living. It was a time of prophecy and divination, as the future could be most clearly seen when the normal rules of reality were suspended. It was also a time of great danger. People would leave offerings of food and drink on their doorsteps to appease the wandering spirits, and would often wear costumes and masks to disguise themselves from any malevolent entities. Great bonfires were lit, not just for warmth, but as a ritual of purification and protection, their flames warding off the encroaching darkness. Samhain was a festival of death and transition, a solemn acknowledgement of the victory of darkness and a time to honor the ancestors before hunkering down for the winter. Many of its traditions, the costumes, the connection with spirits, the sense of spooky fun, have survived for centuries and are the direct ancestors of modern Halloween. On the opposite end of the wheel was Beltane, celebrated on the 1st of May. This was the festival that welcomed the beginning of summer, the light half of the year. Its name means bright fire, and it was a joyous celebration of life, fertility, and new growth. As the power of the sun grew, Beltane was a time to celebrate its life-giving warmth. The central ritual of Beltane involved driving the community's cattle between 2 large bonfires. The smoke from the sacred fires was believed to purify the animals, protect them from disease, and ensure their fertility for the coming year. People would also leap over the flames for their own purification and good fortune. Beltane was a festival of rampant life and sexuality. Young men and women would spend the night in the woods bringing in the May, and many of the resulting unions were sanctified by the festival itself. The maypole, decorated with ribbons and flowers, is a lasting symbol of the festival's focus on fertility. Like Samhain, Beltane was a time when the veil to the otherworld was thin, but the interactions were generally more positive. It was a time to seek the blessings of the Aes Shida for a bountiful summer, to celebrate the marriage of the god and goddess of the land, and to revel in the triumphant return of light and life to the world. The other two major festivals were Imbolc and Lughnasadh. Imbolc, celebrated on the 1st of February, was the festival of the goddess Brigid. It marked the midpoint of winter, the first stirrings of spring. The name means "in the belly," referring to the pregnancy of ewes, and it was a quiet, domestic festival of purification and hope. It celebrated the returning light, the lactation of the ewes, and the promise that spring was on its way. It was a time for cleaning the home, lighting candles, and seeking Brigid's blessing for health and hearth. Lughnasadh, celebrated on the 1st of August, was the festival of the god Lugh. It marked the beginning of the harvest season. According to myth, Lugh established this festival in honor of his foster mother, Talti, who died from exhaustion after clearing the plains of Ireland for agriculture. Lughnasadh was a time of communal gatherings, feasting on the first fruits of the harvest and holding athletic contests, games, and horse races. It was a time to give thanks for the bounty of the earth and to celebrate the skill and strength of the community. Trial marriages, lasting a year and a day, were also common at Lughnasadh fairs, allowing couples to test their compatibility before committing permanently. These four festivals, Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, were the anchors of the Celtic year. They were deeply connected to the agricultural cycle and the rhythms of the natural world, but they were also profound spiritual occasions. They provided a structure for the community to come together, to honor their gods, to remember their ancestors, and to navigate the cyclical journey of life, death, and rebirth. They reinforced the core Celtic belief that time was not a straight line, but a sacred wheel, and that humanity's role was to live in harmony with its turning, celebrating the darkness as much as the light, for one could not exist without the other.
Animals and nature spirits, sacred creatures of myth. In the enchanted worldview of the Celts, the natural world was not a mere backdrop for human drama. It was an active, sentient participant, filled with its own wisdom, magic, and spirit. Animals were not just beasts of the field or forest, they were messengers of the gods, symbols of profound truths, and sometimes the gods themselves in disguise. To the Celtic mind, the boundary between human and animal was fluid and permeable. Heroes could be named after animals, druids could learn from them, and gods could take their form. These sacred creatures were windows into the workings of the otherworld and the very soul of the land. Perhaps the most revered of all animals was the salmon of knowledge. The salmon was a symbol of ancient wisdom and prophetic insight. This was because salmon were believed to have originated in the Well of Sagos, a sacred pool in the heart of the otherworld. Around this well grew 9 magical hazel trees, which dropped their nuts of wisdom into the water. The salmon would eat these nuts, and in doing so would absorb all the knowledge of the universe. The hero or seeker who could then catch and eat one of these special salmon would, in turn, gain this profound wisdom. The most famous story is that of the young Fionn Mac Cumhal, who was tasked by the druid Fine Agus with cooking the salmon of knowledge. As he cooked it, he burned his thumb and instinctively put it in his mouth to cool it, accidentally ingesting a drop of the fish's essence. Instantly, all the knowledge of the world flooded into his mind, a gift he would carry for the rest of his life. Another creature of immense symbolic importance was the stag, particularly the white stag. As the king of the forest, the stag represented untamed mature, fertility, and masculine power. Its shedding and regrowth of antlers each year made it a powerful symbol of rebirth and regeneration. But a white stag was something more. White animals in Celtic myth were almost always messengers from the otherworld. To see a white stag was to be beckoned on a quest, to be drawn into a magical adventure. In the Welsh Mabinogion,
The hero Puil's pursuit of a magnificent white stag is what leads him into the otherworldly realm of Onwin, setting his entire story in motion. The stag was a guide, a sign that the hunter was about to cross the threshold from the mundane into the magical. The skies and battlefields were the domain of the raven and the crow. These intelligent black-feathered birds were inextricably linked with the goddesses of war and fate, particularly the Morrigan, whose name, Badb, even means crow. As scavengers who fed on the carrion of the battlefield, they were seen as the ultimate arbiters of death. Their appearance before a battle was a powerful omen, and their cries were interpreted as prophecies. The Morrigan would often appear in the form of a raven, flying over the fray to inspire terror or to signal the doom of a particular hero. For Cuchulainn, the landing of a crow on his shoulder was the final undeniable sign to his enemies that the great champion was truly dead. These birds represented the dark, prophetic, and sovereign power that presided over life and death. The boar was another creature of both immense power and great danger. It symbolized ferocity, courage, and warrior strength, but also destruction and chaos. Boar hunts are a common theme in Celtic myths, often serving as a test of a hero's mettle. These hunts were perilous, as the supernatural boars of the otherworld were immensely powerful and cunning. The great boar Twerk Twith in Welsh myth was a cursed king in animal form, and hunting him was one of the most difficult labors of King Arthur's court. The hero Dyrwyd Uadwivni of the Fianna was fated to be killed by a boar, a destiny that ultimately came to pass, despite his lover Granya's attempts to prevent it. To wear a boar emblem on a helmet or shield was to invoke its fearless, ferocious spirit. In the realm of domestic animals, horses and cattle held supreme importance. The horse was linked to sovereignty, power, and the sun. Goddesses like the Welsh Rhiannon and the Gaulish Epona were powerful horse goddesses, patrons of cavalry and symbols of the land's fertility. A king's right to rule was often tied to his mastery of horses. Cattle, on the other hand, were the living currency of the Celtic world. Wealth was measured not in gold, but in the size of one's herd. The greatest epic in Irish mythology, the Táin Bó Cúalnge, or Cattle Raid of Cooley, is, at its heart, a war fought over the ownership of a single magnificent magical bull. This shows that cattle were not just livestock, they were symbols of status, power, and prosperity. Even smaller creatures held symbolic weight. The sow was a symbol of fertility and abundance, often associated with the otherworld. The crane was linked with magic and the secret alphabet of the Druids. The wren was the king of the birds, a tiny creature with a powerful spirit. This deep reverence for the animal kingdom illustrates a worldview where humanity was not separate from or superior to nature, but was an integral part of it. The animals were kin, teachers, and divine messengers. To understand them was to understand the deeper secrets of the cosmos. In their flight, their roar, and their silent wisdom, the Celts saw the very reflection of their gods.
Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster. In the pantheon of world heroes, some are known for their wisdom, some for their piety, and some for their cunning. And then there are those who are forces of nature, heroes of such ferocious power and burning intensity that their lives are destined to be as brief as they are brilliant. In the heroic lore of Ireland, there is no greater example of this archetype than Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster. He is the central figure of the Ulster cycle of myths, Ireland's Achilles, a demigod of supernatural strength, unswerving loyalty, and a terrifying battle fury that made him the greatest champion the island had ever known. His is a story of glory, rage, and inevitable tragedy. Cuchulainn was born with a semi-divine lineage. His mother was Dictiri, the sister of Conchebon mac Nessa, the king of Ulster. His father was, in most versions of the tale, none other than Lug Lamfada, the great savior god of the Tuatha De Danann. This divine parentage marked him from birth for a life beyond the mortal norm. He was originally named Setanta, and even as a young boy, his strength and prowess were legendary. At the age of 5, he defeated the entire boy troop of Eamon Macha, the capital of Ulster, in a game of hurling. He earned his famous name, Cuchulainn, meaning the Hound of Culann, through a featful encounter. Invited to a feast at the home of the smith Culann, the young Setanta arrived late. Unaware that a guest was still to come, Culann had unleashed his ferocious guard dog, a beast said to have the strength of 100 men. When the dog attacked, he defended himself, killing the massive hound with a single powerful hurl of his slitar, or hurling ball. Seeing Culann's grief at the loss of his prized protector, the boy, in a display of honor far beyond his years, offered to take the dog's place. "I shall be your hound," he declared, promising to guard the smith's lands until a new puppy could be raised. From that day on, he was known as Cuchulainn. His destiny as a warrior was sealed by a prophecy from the archdruid Cathbad. Cathbad foretold that any warrior who took up arms on that particular day would have a life of everlasting fame and glory, but it would be a very short life. Overhearing this, the 7-year-old Cuchulainn immediately went to King Conchobar and demanded his arms. Despite all protests, he got his wish, knowingly choosing a short, glorious life over a long, unremarkable one. He was then sent to the Scottish warrior woman Scathoch, the Shadowy One, to complete his training. There he mastered the arts of war and learned his most devastating battle technique, the use of the gay bolga, a horrific, multi-barbed spear thrown with the foot, which would enter a man's body and open up with 30 barbs, ensuring a gruesome death. What truly set Cuchulainn apart was his riastrid, or warp spasm. When his battle fury was upon him, he would undergo a monstrous and terrifying transformation. His body would contort and twist in its skin. His hair would stand on end like thorns, with a drop of blood at the tip of each strand. One eye would suck deep into his skull, while the other would pop out on his cheek. His mouth would stretch from ear to ear, and a pillar of dark blood would spout from the top of his head, creating a magical, poisonous mist. In this state, he was an uncontrollable engine of destruction, unable to distinguish friend from foe, his only purpose to kill. This incredible power was put to its ultimate test during the Tan Bo Cuailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley. When Queen Meb of Connacht invaded Ulster to steal the Great Brown Bull, all the men of Ulster were laid low by a magical curse that afflicted them with the pains of childbirth. The only one unaffected was the 17-year-old Cuchulainn. For months, he single-handedly defended the borders of his kingdom against Meb's entire army, a lone boy against a host. He invoked the right of single combat at the ford, challenging and defeating Meb's champions one by one, day after day. His greatest and tragic duel was against his own foster brother and best friend, Ferdiad, whom Meb tricked and shamed into fighting him. For 3 days, the two heroes, who had trained together under Scathoch, fought with breaking hearts. They used every weapon and skill they possessed, and each night they would cease their combat to tend each other's wounds and send gifts of medicine. But on the final day, driven to the edge of his endurance, Cuchulainn called for his gay bolga. He threw the terrible weapon, and it mortally wounded his beloved friend. As Ferdiad lay dying, Cuchulainn was overcome with a grief so immense that his own warp spasm was triggered by sorrow, not rage. Cuchulainn's end was as tragic as his life was glorious.
His enemies, led by the children of those he had killed, conspired to bring him down through sorcery. They knew he was bound by a geas, or sacred prohibition, never to refuse a meal offered to him, and by another geas, never to eat the flesh of a dog, his namesake animal. On his way to his final battle, he was met by 3 hags roasting a dog on a spit. They offered him the meat, forcing him to choose which geas to break. He ate the meat, and the act shattered his spiritual strength. In the ensuing battle, he was mortally wounded by a spear thrown by his enemy Lugaid. Refusing to die on the ground, Cuchulainn tied himself to a standing stone with his own belt so he could face his foes on his feet. He died standing, a symbol of Ulster's indomitable spirit, so terrifying even in death that no one dared approach until the Morrigan, in the form of a crow, landed on his shoulder, confirming his passing. Cuchulainn is the ultimate Celtic warrior hero, a figure of immense power, tragic flaws, and unwavering loyalty, whose burning light illuminated the heroic age of Ireland.
If the Ulster cycle, with its tragic hero Cuchulainn, represents the aristocratic, courtly, and semi-divine world of Irish myth, then there is another great cycle of stories that speaks to a different aspect of the Celtic soul. This is the Fenian cycle, or the Ossianic cycle, and its central hero is not a demigod bound to a king's court, but a lover of the wilderness, a poet, a seer, and the leader of a legendary band of warriors known as the Fianna. His name is Fionn Mac Cumhal, and his stories are filled with folklore, magic, romance, and a deep, abiding love for the natural world. The Fianna of Ireland were not a conventional army. They were a band of elite landless warriors, mostly young men, who lived outside the normal bounds of tribal society. They served the High King as a standing army and a police force during the winter months, but in the summer they roamed the wilds of Ireland, living by hunting and by their wits. To join the Fianna was incredibly difficult. A candidate had to be a master poet, be able to defend himself from multiple attackers while standing in a pit up to his waist, and run through a forest without snapping a twig under his feet or having a single braid of his hair disturbed by a branch. They were a brotherhood of warrior poets, men who were as skilled with words as they were with swords. Fionn Mac Cumhal, or Finn Mac Cool, was their greatest captain. His story begins in peril. His father, Cumhal, the former leader of the Fianna, was killed by his rival, Gall Mac Morna. The young Fionn, whose birth name was Dimni, was raised in secret in the forest by 2 warrior women, who taught him all the skills of hunting and survival. His destiny was revealed when he was a young man studying under the druid Finnegas. Finnegas had spent years trying to catch the legendary salmon of knowledge. When he finally caught it, he tasked Fionn with cooking it, warning him not to eat a single bite. As Fionn turned the fish, he burned his thumb on its hot skin and instinctively put his thumb in his mouth. In that instant, all the wisdom of the world flooded into him. From then on, whenever Fionn needed to access this prophetic knowledge, he would simply place his thumb in his mouth, an act known as the Imbos Foraznai. This gift of foresight, combined with his natural leadership and courage, allowed him to reclaim his rightful place as the leader of the Fianna, supplanting his old rival, Gall Mac Morna, whom he wisely made one of his most trusted lieutenants. The tales of Fionn and the Fianna are more like adventure stories or folklore than the grim, tragic epics of the Ulster cycle. They are filled with giant-slaying magical quests and romantic pursuits. One famous tale tells of how Fionn defeated the fire-breathing goblin of the otherworld, Eileen, who would come to the Hill of Tara every Samhain, lull everyone to sleep with his magical music, and then burn the royal court to the ground. Fionn, using a magical spear that made him immune to the music, stayed awake and killed the goblin,
saving Tara and cementing his heroic status. The members of the Fianna were renowned characters in their own right. There was Fiann's son Ocean, the great poet whose name means little fawn, born from Fiann's brief marriage to a woman who had been transformed into a deer. There was Ocean's son Oscar, the mightiest and most valiant warrior of the Fianna. There was the incredibly swift Kyle Macronan, who could run like the wind, and the handsome Diarmid Uadwivne, who had a magical love spot on his forehead that made him irresistible to all women, a feature that would lead to great tragedy. And there was the hot-headed but loyal Conan Mall, the Bald, who provided much of the comic relief in their tales. The most famous story of the Fenian cycle, second only to Fiann's own rise, is the pursuit of Diarmid and Grania. On the night of the aged Fiann's wedding to the beautiful young Princess Grania, she falls in love with the handsome warrior Diarmid. Desperate to avoid marrying an old man, Grania places a geas, or sacred bond, upon Diarmid, compelling him to run away with her. Torn between his loyalty to Fiann and the power of the geas, Diarmid flees with Grania. This sparks a years-long pursuit across Ireland, with Fiann and the Fianna relentlessly hunting the young couple. It is a romantic and adventurous chase full of narrow escapes and magical encounters. Eventually, Fiann is forced to make peace with them, but he never truly forgives Diarmid. Years later, during a boar hunt, Diarmid is mortally wounded by a magical boar. He could have been saved by a drink of water from Fiann's healing hands, but Fiann, still bitter, twice lets the water slip through his fingers. By the time he returns with a third cup, Diarmid is dead. The end of the Fianna is as legendary as their lives. In their old age, their power waned, and they came into conflict with the new High King of Ireland. This culminated in the Battle of Gavra, where the Fianna were all but wiped out. Fiann himself, in most traditions, does not die. Instead, he lies sleeping in a hidden cave beneath Ireland, surrounded by his warriors, waiting for the day when the horn of the Fianna is sounded 3 times and he will rise again in Ireland's greatest hour of need. The Fianna cycle represents a different ideal from the Ulster cycle. It is a world less concerned with kings and courts and more with the beauty of the wilderness, the bonds of brotherhood, and the thrill of adventure. Fiann is not a grim, fated demigod, but a wise, resourceful, and deeply human hero, a leader who embodies the Celtic love of poetry, nature, and the wild, free life.
Celtic myth today. Influence on fantasy, neo-druidry, and pop culture. Though the ancient Celtic world has long since vanished, its myths have refused to die. They have echoed down through the centuries, their power to enchant and inspire undiminished. In the modern era, Celtic mythology has experienced a vibrant and multifaceted renaissance, becoming a deep well of inspiration for fantasy literature, a spiritual touchstone for new religious movements, and a rich source of material for film, music, and games. The tales of shining gods, tragic heroes, and the magical otherworld have found a powerful new life, proving that the old stories still speak to our deepest human longings. The journey of Celtic myth into modern fantasy literature began in earnest with the authors who followed in J.R.R. Tolkien's footsteps. While Tolkien himself drew more heavily from Norse and Anglo-Saxon sources, the generation after him turned eagerly to the dreamlike, magical landscapes of Welsh and Irish lore. Authors like Lloyd Alexander in his beloved Chronicles of Prydain series drew directly from the Welsh Mabinogion, reimagining figures like Gwydion and Aron for a young adult audience. The magical cauldron, the heroic pig keeper, and the sense of a world steeped in ancient magic are all direct descendants of Welsh myth. This influence deepened with the rise of the fantasy genre. Writers like Evangeline Walton and Patricia Keneally Morrison retold the ancient myths with psychological depth and modern sensibilities. Stephen Lawhead's Pendragon cycle fused Arthurian legend with a vivid and detailed reconstruction of Celtic Britain, rooting the familiar tales of Arthur and Merlin in a world of druids, Roman legionaries, and tribal kings. Today, Countless fantasy novels feature elements lifted directly from Celtic lore, the seelie and unseelie courts of the Fae, the concept of the Geas as a magical bond, and the archetype of the bard whose music holds real power. The entire subgenre of Celtic fantasy is a testament to the enduring appeal of this specific mythological flavor. Beyond literature, Celtic mythology has become a foundational inspiration for modern spiritual movements, most notably Neo-Druidry. Beginning in the 18th century with a revival of interest in ancient British history, modern Druidry has evolved into a diverse and recognized earth-based spirituality. While modern Druids do not claim to be direct, unbroken inheritors of the ancient Druidic orders, they draw their core inspiration from the Celtic worldview. They revere nature, celebrate the eightfold wheel of the year with festivals at the solstices, equinoxes, and the 4 cross-quarter days of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, and honor the gods and goddesses of the Celtic pantheons. For many, these myths are not just stories, but sacred texts that offer guidance on how to live a life in harmony with the earth, the community, and the spirit. The music industry has also been deeply touched by the Celtic spirit. From the haunting, ethereal soundscapes of artists like Enya and Clannad, which evoke the mists of the otherworld, to the fiery energy of Celtic punk bands like the Pogues and Dropkick Murphys, the traditional music of the Celtic nations has found a global audience. Folk metal bands like Illuvity from Switzerland have built their entire identity around a fusion of heavy metal and traditional Celtic folk music, with lyrics sung in a reconstructed Gaulish language, telling the stories of ancient battles and beliefs. The myths provide a deep well of lyrical and emotional content for musicians seeking to connect with a sense of ancient primal power. In film and video games, the influence is just as pervasive. While not as dominant as Greek or Norse mythology in the blockbuster space, the aesthetic and themes are everywhere. The 2004 film King Arthur, starring Clive Owen, attempted to strip away the medieval romance and portray a more historically grounded, Celtic version of the legend. Animated films from the Irish studio Cartoon Saloon, like the Academy Award-nominated The Secret of Kells, Song of the Sea, and Wolfwalkers, are breathtakingly beautiful explorations of Irish mythology and folklore, bringing the stories of Selkies, saints, and shapeshifters to a new generation with stunning visual artistry. In the world of video games, the influence is often felt in the world-building of major fantasy franchises. The Elder Scrolls series features the Breton race, known for their innate magical abilities, a nod to the Celtic Britons. The popular game Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice plunges players into a dark and psychologically intense journey into a world based on Celtic and Norse myth. And countless role-playing games feature druid character classes who are guardians of nature, healers, and shapeshifters directly inspired by the Celtic archetype. From the pages of a fantasy novel to the chant of a modern druid, from the melody of a haunting folk song to the vibrant animation of a child's film, the legacy of Celtic mythology is alive and well. It continues to thrive because it speaks to something timeless within us: our connection to the natural world, our fascination with magic, our belief in the power of a good story, and the sense that just beyond the veil of our ordinary lives, a world of wonder and enchantment still waits.
Celtic mythology through Christianity. Hidden gods, new saints. The arrival of Christianity in the Celtic lands, beginning most famously with St. Patrick's mission to Ireland in the 5th century, marked a profound turning point in their history. It was a moment of immense cultural and spiritual change, but it was not the swift and total eradication of the old pagan beliefs that one might imagine. Instead, what unfolded over centuries was a complex and fascinating process of syncretism, adaptation, and reinterpretation. The old gods were not simply forgotten, they were transformed. They put on new masks, hid within the stories of new saints, and were woven into the very fabric of the new faith, creating a uniquely Celtic form of Christianity that echoes with the magic of the pagan past. The key to this process lies with the individuals who wrote down the myths, the early Irish monks. These men were devout Christians, yet they were also scholars with a deep love for their own native culture and its rich oral traditions. they faced a dilemma: how to preserve the epic stories of their ancestors without validating the pagan gods they featured. Their solution was ingenious. They didn't erase the gods, they demoted them. In the chronicles they composed, such as the Lebor Gabala Eren, the Tuatha De Danann are no longer presented as gods in the religious sense. Instead, they are historicized, reframed as a race of ancient, magical, but ultimately mortal kings and queens who ruled Ireland in a distant, pre-Christian past. They are powerful sorcerers and great heroes, but not deities to be worshipped. Lugh is a great king, the Dagdar a powerful chieftain, but their divinity is carefully stripped away. After their defeat by the mortal Milesians, they do not die, but retreat into the hollow hills to become the Ael Sidi, the people of the mounds, the powerful but diminished fairy folk of later lore. This allowed the monks to record their stories while fitting them into a Christian historical framework that began with the biblical creation. An even more direct form of syncretism was the transformation of pagan deities into Christian saints. The most striking example of this is the goddess Brigid. As the beloved triple goddess of healing, poetry, and the forge, her cult was so deeply ingrained in the Irish psyche that it could not be easily uprooted. So she was reborn as Saint Brigid of Kildare. The new saint shared the goddess's name, her feast day of February 1st, the pagan festival of Imbolc, and many of her attributes. Saint Brigid's miracles often involved fire, healing, and providing endless food, just like her pagan predecessor. The perpetual sacred flame kept at her monastery in Kildare was a direct continuation of the pagan practice of tending a sacred fire in the goddess's honor. Through this process, the worship of Brigid was able to continue, safely cloaked in a Christian mantle. Other gods were less fortunate. Figures who couldn't be easily saint-washed were often demonized. The horned god Cernunnos from Gaul, a deity of nature, fertility, and the wilderness, with his antlered head, was an easy target for Christian writers looking for a visual model for the devil. The shadowy, often frightening aspects of the otherworld were reinterpreted as hell or the domain of demons. The Asidh, once powerful gods, slowly became the often mischievous, sometimes dangerous, but ultimately less threatening fairies of folklore, their power diminished and their nature made more capricious. The heroic sagas were also reinterpreted through a Christian lens. While the core stories of Cuchulainn and the Táin were preserved with remarkable fidelity, later scribes would sometimes add Christian glosses or episodes. A famous addition to the story of the pagan king Concobar Magnessa claims that he died of rage on hearing of Christ's crucifixion, his druids having explained the cosmic disturbance to him. This anachronistic tale attempts to baptize the pagan hero, making him a righteous, albeit unknowing, Christian. Similarly, the story of Oisian's return from Tir na Og often ends with him meeting St. Patrick. Their long dialogues pit the values of the heroic pagan past against the new Christian faith, with Oisian defiantly defending the glory of Fionn and of Fianna, while Patrick promises salvation through Christ. These stories are a fascinating record of a culture in transition, grappling with the tension between its past and its future. Even the landscape, once sacred to pagan gods, was reconsecrated. Holy wells once dedicated to goddesses like Brigid became associated with the Virgin Mary or local saints. Standing stones and sacred groves, once the sites of druidic ritual, had crosses carved into them or churches built nearby. This was a way of claiming the spiritual power of a place for the new religion, absorbing its pre-existing sanctity rather than trying to destroy it. This process of absorption and transformation is why so much of Celtic mythology survived. Unlike in many other parts of Europe, where paganism was more brutally suppressed, Irish Christianity found a way to make peace with its own past. The monks who picked up their quills to write down the tales of the Tuatha De Danann and the Fianna became the unlikely saviours of the very mythology their religion had displaced. They preserved a world of magic, honour and sorrow, allowing the voices of the old gods to echo through the centuries, forever entwined with the ringing of the saints' bells.
Symbols, runes, and Ogham, Celtic spiritual language. The Celtic world speaks to us not only through its epic myths and heroic tales, but also through a rich and complex language of symbols. Carved into stone, etched into metalwork, and inscribed on ancient trees, these symbols were not mere decoration. They were a visual representation of the Celtic cosmos, a sacred geometry that expressed their deepest beliefs about life, death, and the eternal spiraling nature of existence. From the intricate knots that have no beginning or end to the mysterious stick-like alphabet of the Druids, this symbolic language is a direct window into the Celtic soul. Perhaps the most recognizable of all Celtic symbols is the triskelion, or triple spiral. This design, featuring 3 interlocking spirals, is found in some of the most ancient and sacred sites in Ireland, most famously carved into the entrance stone of the 5,000-year-old megalithic tomb of Newgrange. The triskelion is a perfect embodiment of the Celtic obsession with the number 3. It can represent a multitude of powerful triads, the 3 realms of land, sea, and sky, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, the maiden, mother, and crone aspects of the goddess, or the past, present, and future. The continuous swirling motion of the spirals suggests perpetual movement, a dynamic energy that flows through the cosmos. It is a symbol of eternal becoming, a universe that is constantly unfolding and cycling back upon itself. This love of spirals and intricate flowing lines is also seen in Celtic knotwork or interlace. These beautiful, complex patterns, which reach their artistic peak in the illuminated manuscripts created by early Christian monks, such as the Book of Kells, have deep roots in pagan Celtic art. The knots are typically formed from a single, unbroken line that weaves over and under itself, with no discernible beginning or end. This represents the interconnectedness of all things and the eternal nature of the spirit. The endless line symbolizes the path of life, the cycles of eternity, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship and love. A shield decorated with knotwork was not just protected by wood and leather, but by a magical symbol of eternity and interconnectedness. While these visual symbols were widespread, the Celts of Ireland also developed a unique and mysterious system of writing known as Ogham. Unlike the runes of the Norse, which were primarily an alphabet of angled lines, Ogham was an alphabet composed of straight lines and notches carved along the edge of a standing stone or a piece of wood. Each letter, or fader, consisted of a series of 1 to 5 strokes set at different angles to a central stem line. Ogham is often called the Celtic tree alphabet because each of its 20 letters is named after a specific tree or plant. The first letter, B, is Baith, the birch tree. L is Lewis, the rowan tree. D is Dyer, the mighty oak. This connection reveals a profound reverence for the natural world, particularly the forest. For the Druids who developed it, each tree had its own spirit, its own magical properties, and its own symbolic meaning. The birch represented new beginnings, the rowan protection, and the oak strength and wisdom. To write with Ogham was not just to spell out a word, but to invoke the power and spirit of the trees themselves. The primary use of Ogharin in the historical record was for memorial inscriptions. Standing stones across Ireland and Western Britain bear the names of important individuals carved in Ogham, often reading something like "Name, son of father's name." They were grave markers, but also territorial claims, a way of permanently inscribing one's lineage onto the land itself. However,
The myths suggest a deeper, more magical purpose. In the sagas, heroes use Ogum for secret communication, carving cryptic messages on wood. The hero Cuchulainn once left an Ogum inscription on a hoop, challenging an entire army to decipher it or not pass. It is widely believed that Ogum was also used by the Druids for divination. By drawing carved sticks, or colbrony, from a bag and interpreting the letters, a seer could gain insight into the future, much like casting runes. It was a sacred, magical script, a language of the learned and the mystical. It is important to distinguish Ogum from the runes of the Germanic and Norse peoples. While both were alphabets with magical and divinatory associations, they are visually and linguistically distinct systems. The authentic magical script of the Irish Celts was the elegant arboreal system of Ogum. These symbols, the triskelion, the endless knot, and the Ogum letters, are more than just ancient artifacts. They are a form of communication that transcends time. They speak of a worldview where everything is connected, where time is a cycle, and where the wisdom of the natural world is the greatest teacher. They are the fingerprints of the Celtic imagination, a sacred language of spirals and trees that still whispers of the magic at the heart of their world.
Kingship and the land, the ritual of sovereignty. In the modern world, we think of kingship as a matter of succession, election, or conquest. But in the mind of the ancient Celts, to be a king was something far deeper, far more mystical. A king did not simply rule over the land, he was ritually and spiritually married to it. The health of the king and the health of his kingdom were inextricably linked. If the king was just, honorable, and physically perfect, the land would flourish, the cattle would be fertile, the harvests would be bountiful, and the waters would teem with fish. But if the king was flawed, unjust, or blemished, the land itself would wither, bringing plague, famine, and disaster upon his people. This sacred bond between the ruler and the realm is the concept of sovereignty, and it is the central pillar of Celtic political and spiritual thought. The land itself was personified as a goddess, the goddess of sovereignty. She was the spirit of the territory, and it was her favor that granted a man the right to rule. The inauguration of a new king, therefore, was not just a political ceremony, but a sacred wedding, a banas rigi, or wedding feast of kingship. Through this ritual, the king became the land's consort, and his just rule was the consummation of that marriage, ensuring the fertility and prosperity of his divine bride. This idea is most vividly illustrated in myths about the loathly lady. A potential king and his companions, often out hunting, would encounter a monstrously ugly hag. She is the sovereignty goddess in her terrifying, untamed aspect. She would challenge the men, often demanding a kiss. While others would recoil in disgust, the true, destined king would overcome his revulsion and embrace her. The moment he did so, she would transform into a radiantly beautiful woman, revealing her true nature and bestowing upon him the kingship. This powerful allegory illustrates that the true leader must be willing to embrace his kingdom in all its aspects, both fair and foul, to see the beauty and potential beneath a challenging exterior. The historian Giraldus Cambrensis described a ritual in medieval Ireland where a king was inaugurated by symbolically mating with a white mare, which was then sacrificed and boiled in a broth from which the king and his people would drink and bathe. While this account is likely exaggerated by a hostile observer, it points to the primal, deeply ingrained connection between the king, the land, and its fertility, often represented by the horse. Because the king's body was a microcosm of the kingdom, he had to be physically perfect. Any blemish, wound, or disability was seen as a flaw in the land itself and was grounds for abdication. The most famous example of this is Nuada of the Silver Hand, the king of the Tuatha De Danann. When he lost his arm in the first battle of Magturded, he was immediately forced to give up his throne, despite being a wise and beloved leader.
Even after he was fitted with a functioning silver arm, he could not reclaim the kingship until the physician, Diankek's son, Miak, managed to graft his original arm back on, magically restoring him to wholeness. This rigid rule underscores how literally the Celts took the connection between the king's body and the body of the land. The king's role was to maintain fear flatehun, the ruler's truth or justice. This meant upholding the law, being generous with his wealth, and ensuring peace and stability. A just king brought prosperity. An unjust king brought ruin. The disastrous reign of Bress over the Tuatha De Danann is the perfect cautionary tale. As a stingy and inhospitable king, his rule brought nothing but misery. The cows stopped giving milk, the crops failed, and the gods were reduced to servitude. His injustice was a blight on the land. It was only when he was satirized by a poet, an act that magically revealed his flaws by causing blisters on his face, that his unfitness was made manifest and he could be deposed. The king was also surrounded by taboos and sacred prohibitions, or geasa, designed to protect his sacred status and, by extension, the well-being of his kingdom. Cormac MacArt, one of Ireland's most legendary high kings, was said to have a long list of geasa, such as not having a crooked gabled house in his capital of Tara, and not having the fruits of a single tree gathered all at once. These seemingly arbitrary rules were part of the magical contract that maintained the balance between the king and the land. This sacred kingship was not a guarantee of a peaceful life. The king was the embodiment of his people, and in times of crisis, he could become a sacred sacrifice. Some scholars suggest that in the deepest parts of pagan antiquity, a king might be ritually slain after a set period of rule or during a time of famine to rejuvenate the land with his royal blood. The bog bodies, found preserved in the peat of northern Europe, many of whom were high-status individuals who met a violent and ritualized end, are often cited as potential evidence for this grim practice. Whether this was common or not, the idea of the king as a potential sacrifice highlights the immense weight of his responsibility. He was not just a ruler, he was the living vessel of his people's fortune, a man married to a goddess whose very body was the kingdom he served. This mystical bond is what gave Celtic kingship its profound power and its heavy, sacred burden.
The sacred feminine, goddesses and queens. In the patriarchal worlds of many mythologies, goddesses are often relegated to the roles of wives, mothers, or personifications of domestic virtues. But in the world of Celtic myth, female power is a foundational, untamable, and absolutely central force. From the goddesses who are the land itself to the warrior queens who lead armies, the sacred feminine in Celtic lore is a dynamic and formidable presence. These are not passive deities. They are prime movers, shapers of destiny, and sources of sovereignty, embodying the wild, fertile, and often fearsome power of nature and fate. At the very heart of this concept is the sovereignty goddess. In ancient Ireland, the land was not seen as an inanimate territory to be conquered, but as a living, divine female entity. A king could not simply take power through force. He had to be chosen by the land, to be ritually married to her. This marriage was often personified in myth by the king's encounter with a goddess who represented his territory. She might first appear as a hideous, fearsome hag, demanding a kiss or a more intimate union. Only the true and worthy king would have the courage and respect to embrace her. When he did, she would magically transform into a radiantly beautiful young woman, granting him the right to rule and promising that his reign and the land itself would be fertile and prosperous. This motif appears in numerous tales. The great King Niall of the Nine Hostages secures his dynasty's right to rule by embracing the Hag of Sovereignty. The name of Ireland itself comes from the goddess Eru, who, along with her sisters Bonba and Fodla, met the invading Milesians and offered them the kingship in exchange for naming the island after them. The land is female, and all legitimate power flows from her. This gives female figures an immense foundational power that underpins the entire political and spiritual landscape. This divine female power is embodied in the great goddesses of the Tuatha De Danann. There is Danu, the Great Mother, from whom the entire pantheon takes its name. There is the beloved Brigid, the triple goddess of the sacred fire of creativity. And then there is the Morrigan, the Great Queen, a terrifying and magnificent figure who embodies the most fearsome aspects of female power. As a triple goddess of war and fate, she is not a follower, but a leader. She chooses who lives and who dies on the battlefield. She offers her love and power to heroes, and she brings ruin upon those who scorn her. Her union with the Dagda is a meeting of equals, a necessary alliance between the god of tribal order and the goddess of sovereign, chaotic power, without which the gods could not win their greatest battle. This tradition of powerful women extends from the divine to the mortal realm in the form of formidable queens and warrior women. The most famous of these is Queen Med of Connacht, the driving force behind the epic Tain Bo Cuailnge. Med is no passive monarch. She is a fierce, ambitious, and sexually liberated ruler who leads her own armies and takes many husbands and lovers, declaring that she only desires a man who is without jealousy, fear, or meanness. Her quest for the brown bull of Cooley is driven by her refusal to be even slightly less wealthy or powerful than her husband, Alil. Though she is often portrayed as the antagonist, she is a figure of immense agency and power, a mortal woman who embodies the same kind of sovereign authority as a goddess. The tradition of the female warrior is also strong. In the Ulster cycle, the hero Cuchulainn learns his martial skills not from a man, but the warrior woman Scachec, the shadowy one, who runs a military academy in Scotland. Scachec is the master of arms, a formidable fighter who trains the greatest heroes of her age. Her rival, and sometimes ally, is another warrior queen named Aoife, whom Cuchulainn must defeat in single combat. Their encounter results in a son, highlighting the common theme of powerful women being both lovers and adversaries to the male heroes. Even in tragedy, Celtic women display immense power and agency. Deirdre of the Sorrows is not a passive victim. She actively chooses her love, Naishi, and persuades him to flee with her, defying a king and a prophecy. Her eventual suicide is not an act of weakness, but a final, defiant act of will, choosing death over a life of dishonor under the king who murdered her beloved. Rhiannon, in the Welsh Mabinogion, endures a humiliating and unjust punishment with a quiet, powerful dignity, never losing her noble bearing. These are not damsels in distress. They are women of immense fortitude, whose choices drive the narrative and whose suffering has profound consequences. This powerful sacred feminine is a defining characteristic of Celtic mythology. It reflects a worldview that saw the earth as a mother, that understood power as flowing from both male and female sources, and that was not afraid to depict women as complex beings who could be nurturing healers like Brigid, formidable rulers like Med, or terrifying arbiters of fate like the Morrigan. They are the land, the law, and the lore, and without them, the world of the Celts would be bereft of its deepest magic and its most powerful truths.
Shape-shifting, prophecy, and magic. The world of Celtic mythology is a world steeped in enchantment. Magic is not a rare or spectacular event. It is the very air the characters breathe, the very soil beneath their feet. It is a force that can be wielded by gods, druids, and sorcerers, a power that can alter reality, reveal the future, and transform the very shape of one's being.
To understand the stories of the Celts, one must understand the mechanisms of their magic, a system rooted in the power of the natural world, the spoken word, and the fluid boundary between this world and the other world. Three of the most prominent forms of this magic are shape-shifting, prophecy, and the binding power of the guess. Shape-shifting is one of the most common and powerful expressions of magic in Celtic lore. The ability to change one's physical form was a sign of immense power, often possessed by deities and powerful druids. It represents the belief that form is not fixed and that the spirit can inhabit different vessels. The Morrigan, the great goddess of war and fate, was a master shapeshifter, appearing as a beautiful woman, an old hag, a she-wolf, an eel, and most famously, a crow. Her transformations were tools of deception, intimidation, and prophecy, allowing her to interact with the world in multiple, mysterious ways. The gods of the Tuatha De Danann frequently employed shape-shifting. In the tale of the wooing of Etain, the god Midir's wife, Fuamnach, in a jealous rage, turns her rival Etain into a pool of water, then a worm, and finally a beautiful purple fly who is blown about by the winds for 7 years. The great hero, Fionn mac Cumhall's mother, was transformed into a deer, which is why his son was named Oisin, or Little Fawn. Perhaps the most tragic use of shape-shifting is in the story of the children of Lear, who were cursed by their stepmother to live as swans for 900 years. This form of magical transformation was often punitive, a way to trap or exile an enemy in a lesser form, stripping them of their power while cruelly preserving their human mind. This reflects a deep-seated belief in the soul's independence from its physical body. Prophecy, or divination, was another cornerstone of Celtic magic, central to the role of the druid and the seer. In a world governed by a strong sense of fate, the ability to see into the future was a source of immense power and dread. Prophecies were not vague predictions. They were often highly specific and seemingly inescapable, setting the tragic events of many stories in motion from the very beginning. The archdruid Cathbad's prophecy at the birth of Deirdre of the Sorrows foretells her entire tragic life, and everything that follows seems to be a fulfillment of his words. Similarly, the prophecy that the Fomorian king Balor would be killed by his own grandson dictated his actions, and ironically led directly to the birth of his slayer, Lugh. The methods of divination were varied. Scrying could be done by gazing into water or polished stones. The interpretation of dreams was considered a direct line to the other world. But the most powerful form of prophetic insight was the imbas pharosnai, the knowledge that illuminates. This was a state of ecstatic, poetic inspiration, a divine frenzy that allowed the seer, or the fili, to channel truths from the other world. Fionn mac Cumhall's ability to gain knowledge by chewing on his thumb was a form of this. For others, it involved complex rituals of sensory deprivation, wrapping oneself in the hide of a sacrificed bull to induce a trance-like state and receive visions. Prophecy in Celtic myth is a reminder that time is not always linear, and that the future can cast a long shadow back into the present. Perhaps the most uniquely Celtic form of magic is the guess, plural giasa, a sacred, magically binding prohibition or taboo placed on an individual. A guess was not exactly a curse, nor was it a promise. It was an intricate part of a person's fate, a set of rules they had to live by. Breaking a guess would inevitably lead to dishonor, misfortune, or death. Giasa could be placed on a person at birth by a druid, or acquired later in life. They often came in contradictory pairs, creating an impossible ethical dilemma for the hero. Cuchulainn, for example, was bound by a guess never to eat the flesh of a dog, his namesake animal, and by another guess never to refuse hospitality. His enemies exploited this by offering him a meal of dog meat, forcing him to break one of his sacred bonds. This act spiritually weakened him and led directly to his death.
The hero Diarmid was under a gas from Grania to elope with her, which put him in direct conflict with his loyalty to Fionn. This is the central conflict of their story. The gas is a powerful narrative device that explores the themes of fate, honor, and taboo. It represents the intricate, often invisible rules that govern a hero's life, and shows that true danger often lies not in facing an enemy, but in transgressing one's own sacred personal boundaries. Together, shape-shifting, prophecy, and the gas create a world that is deeply magical and psychologically complex. They illustrate a belief in a fluid reality where appearances can be deceiving, the future is known but unavoidable, and life is governed by a complex web of spiritual laws. This magic is not just a collection of spells, it is a fundamental aspect of the Celtic worldview, a way of understanding a universe that is mysterious, interconnected, and profoundly enchanted.
Deirdre of the Sorrows, a tragic love story. Not all tragedies are forged in the heat of battle or by the curses of gods. Some are whispered at a child's birth, prophecies of a beauty so great it can only lead to ruin. This is the fate of Deirdre, the central figure in one of the three sorrowful tales of Erin, a story of destined love, political betrayal, and a sorrow so profound it gave her the name by which she is forever known, Deirdre of the Sorrows. Her tale is the Irish equivalent of Helen of Troy, a warning that great beauty can be a curse, and that love, when pitted against the pride of kings, often leads to death. The story begins at a feast in the house of Fedlamid mac Dail, the chief storyteller to Conchobar mac Nessa, the king of Ulster. As the men feasted, Fedlamid's wife, pregnant, went into labor, and from within her womb the unborn child let out a terrifying shriek, a scream so piercing it threw the entire company into a panic. The king's archdruid, Cathbad, was called upon to interpret this dreadful omen. Placing his hand on the mother's belly, Cathbad delivered a grim prophecy. The child would be a girl of breathtaking, unparalleled beauty, with eyes like stars and hair like the raven's wing. She would be named Deirdre, but her beauty would be fatal. Great kings and champions would go to war over her, and she would bring death and destruction upon the kingdom of Ulster. The warriors of Ulster, hearing this, immediately demanded that the child be killed at birth to avert the prophecy. But King Conchobar, intrigued by the description of her future beauty, and perhaps arrogant enough to believe he could control fate, intervened. He declared that he would take the child, have her raised in seclusion, and when she came of age, he would marry her himself, keeping her beauty and the prophecy under his own royal command. So, Deirdre was taken from her parents and raised in a remote, isolated fortress, with only her foster mother, a poetess named Levercum, for company. She grew up seeing no one, especially no men, apart from the aging King Conchobar on his occasional visits. As Cathbad had foretold, she blossomed into a woman of such stunning beauty that it seemed almost otherworldly. But she was lonely, and longed for a love that was not the possessive claim of an old king. One snowy day, she saw a raven land on the blood-soaked snow where her foster father had just killed a calf. The stark contrast of the three colors, the black feathers, the red blood, and the white snow, struck her with a vision of the man she was destined to love. I will love only a man who has those three colors: hair the color of the raven, skin the color of snow, and cheeks the color of blood. Levercum knew of only one man who fit this description: Naishi, a handsome young warrior and one of the three noble sons of Usniak, who were among Ulster's finest champions. Through Levercum's arrangement, Deirdre and Naishi met. They fell instantly and deeply in love. Knowing that King Conchobar would soon come to claim her, Deirdre persuaded Naishi and his two loyal brothers, Ainley and Arden, to flee with her. They escaped from Ulster and sailed to Scotland,
beginning a life of exile. For years they lived a happy, idyllic life, moving from place to place, hunting in the wilderness and living on their wits. But King Conchobar never forgot his stolen prize. His pride was wounded, and his desire for Deirdre festered into a dark obsession. He hunted for news of them, his spies searching every corner of the land. Eventually, he located them in Scotland. Realizing he could not take them by force in a foreign land, he decided on a treacherous plan. He summoned his most trusted counselors and feigned forgiveness, declaring that he missed the noble sons of Usniac and wanted to welcome them back to Ulster. He sent a delegation, led by the honorable but aging hero Fergus mac Roish, to deliver his message of peace and a promise of safe conduct. Deirdre, who had prophetic sight, was filled with a sense of dread. She had terrible visions of their doom and begged Naisi not to return. But Naisi, bound by his warrior's honor and trusting the word of his king and the guarantee of Fergus, agreed to go back to Ulster. As they journeyed back to Ulster, Conchobar's treachery unfolded. He arranged for Fergus, their protector, to be delayed by a geas that forced him to attend a feast, leaving the fugitives in the care of Fergus's sons. When Deirdre, Naisi, and his brothers arrived at Emin Macha, the royal seat of Ulster, they were not welcomed into the main hall, but were lodged in the House of the Red Branch, the Hall of the Champions. Conchobar, consumed by his need to know if Deirdre was still as beautiful as ever, sent Levercam to spy on them. The loyal foster mother lied, telling the king that Deirdre's years in exile had ravaged her beauty. Unsatisfied, Conchobar sent another spy who caught a glimpse of Deirdre's radiant face and reported back to the king. In a fit of jealous rage, Conchobar ordered his mercenaries to attack the Red Branch house and kill the sons of Usniac. The three brothers fought with incredible bravery, but they were outnumbered and the house was set on fire. They were eventually captured and brought before the king. No Ulster warrior would agree to execute the noble sons of Usniac, so the deed fell to a foreigner whose father had been killed by Naisi. With a single swing of a great sword, all three brothers were beheaded. In the aftermath of the slaughter, Deirdre was captured by Conchobar. For a year she lived in his court as his possession, but she never once smiled. Her grief was a silent, stone-cold weight. Conchobar, frustrated by her sorrow, mockingly asked her what she hated most. She replied, "You and the man who killed Naisi." The cruel king then declared he would give her for a year to the executioner she so despised. As she was being carried away in a chariot, Deirdre, seeing a large rock by the side of the road, threw herself from the moving chariot and dashed her head against it, choosing death over a life of dishonor. Deirdre's tragic death fulfilled Cathbad's prophecy. The outrage over Conchobar's treachery caused a civil war in Ulster. Fergus mac Roish, furious at being used as a pawn, defected to Conchobar's arch-enemy Queen Mebd of Connacht, leading to the Great War of the Tyne Bo Cuenya. Deirdre of the Sorrows, the woman whose beauty was destined to bring ruin, had sealed her fate, and in doing so plunged her entire kingdom into darkness.
The Children of Lear, Swans and Sorrow. Among the rich and varied tales of Irish mythology, some stand out not for their epic battles or heroic deeds, but for their profound sense of sorrow, beauty, and endurance. These are the three sorrowful tales of Erin, and the most famous and heartbreaking of them all is the story of the Children of Lear. It is a tale of jealousy, cruel magic, and a curse that spans 900 years. A poignant saga that explores the depths of familial love, the pain of exile, and the enduring power of the human and animal spirit in the face of unimaginable suffering. The story begins in the age of the Tuatha De Danann, after their retreat into the otherworld. The kingship of the divine race was contested, and the choice fell to a god named
Bobderg. This angered another powerful lord named Lear, who felt he was more deserving of the throne. To appease the proud Lear and unite the Tuatha, Bobderg offered him one of his own beautiful daughters in marriage. Lear chose the eldest, a woman named Abe. Lear and Abe were deeply in love, and their union was blessed with 4 beautiful children. The eldest was a daughter, Fionnuala, followed by a son, Aed, and then twin boys, Fiachra and Conn. Their home was filled with joy and laughter, but tragedy struck when Abe died, leaving Lear heartbroken and his 4 young children without a mother. Seeing Lear's immense grief, Bobderg, in another act of kindness, offered him his second daughter, Aoife, to be his new wife and a mother to the children. At first, all was well. Aoife loved her sister's children and cared for them as her own. But soon the poison of jealousy began to fester in her heart. She saw the deep and devoted love that Lear had for his children, and she grew to resent the attention they received. She saw them as rivals for her husband's affection, and her love turned to a bitter, consuming hatred. One day, Aoife, now driven by her dark obsession, took the 4 children on a journey to visit their grandfather, Bobderg. On the way, she ordered her servants to kill the children, but they refused, horrified by her command. Taking matters into her own hands, she led the children to the shore of Loch Derivara. As they played in the water, Aoife, who was a skilled sorceress, pulled out a druid's magic wand and cast a terrible spell upon them. She transformed her 4 stepchildren into 4 beautiful white swans. Fionnuala, the eldest, begged for mercy, but Aoife's heart was stone. She did, however, grant them 3 concessions. They would keep their human consciousness, their reason, and their beautiful voices. They would be able to speak and sing in human language. But the curse itself was unyielding. They were doomed to spend 900 years in the form of swans. 300 years on the cold waters of Loch Derivara, 300 years on the stormy sea of Moyle between Ireland and Scotland, and a final 300 years on the waters of Inishglora, off the coast of Mayo. The curse would only be broken, Aoife decreed, when a woman from the south was wed to a man from the north, and when they heard the sound of a Christian bell. With a cruel laugh, she left them to their fate. When Lear discovered what his wife had done, his grief was beyond measure. He confronted Aoife, and as punishment, her father Bobderg transformed her into a demon of the air, doomed to be shrieked and tossed about in the winds for all eternity. Lear spent the rest of his life on the shores of Loch Derivara, speaking with his swan children, listening to their enchanting, sorrowful music, until he eventually died of a broken heart. For the 4 children, their long and lonely exile began. For 300 years they endured the cold of the lake, finding comfort only in each other's company and their beautiful singing. The people of the Tuatha De Danann would often come to the shore to listen to their music, which was so beautiful it could lull all who heard it into a peaceful sleep. Then came the harshest part of their ordeal, 300 years on the wild and tempestuous Sea of Moyle. They were battered by storms, separated from one another in the raging waves, and suffered from bitter cold and loneliness. Fionnuala, ever the protective oldest sister, would shelter her brothers under her wings, her feathers often frozen to the icy rocks. It was a time of pure, relentless misery, a testament to their incredible endurance. Finally, they began their last 300 years on the waters of Inishglora. As their long exile drew to a close, a new age had dawned in Ireland. The old gods were forgotten, and the land was now Christian.
One morning, the Swan children heard a strange new sound ringing across the water, the sound of a Christian bell from a small, newly built church. They knew their deliverance was near. A monk named Kaomog heard their story and took them into his care. The local chieftain, who was a man from the north, was soon married to a princess from the south, fulfilling the second condition of the prophecy. As the Swan children were brought into the church, the sound of the bell broke the ancient spell. Their feathered skins fell away, but the 900 years had taken their toll. They were not restored as beautiful young children, but as incredibly ancient, withered, and frail old people on the very brink of death. The monk Kaomog hastily baptized them before they died, and they were buried together in a single grave. 4 souls finally at peace after centuries of sorrow. The tale of the children of Lear is one of the most powerful and enduring in all of Celtic literature. It is a story about the devastating consequences of jealousy, but more profoundly, it is a tribute to the resilience of the spirit, the enduring power of sibling love, and the haunting beauty that can be found even in the deepest sorrow.
The Mabinogion, Wales's mythic legacy. While Ireland has its epic cycles of Ulster and the Fianna, another branch of the great Celtic mythological tree grew and blossomed in the mountains and valleys of Wales. The core of these Welsh traditions is preserved in a remarkable collection of medieval prose tales known as the Mabinogion. Compiled from older oral traditions, these stories are a gateway into a world that is at once familiar in its Celtic themes of magic and the otherworld, yet distinctly Welsh in its character and tone. The Mabinogion is not a single unified epic, but a collection of 11 tales that weave together mythology, folklore, and early Arthurian romance, painting a dreamlike and haunting picture of the ancient Welsh soul. The name Mabinogion is something of a historical accident, but it has come to represent the entire collection. The heart of the book lies in the 4 branches of the Mabinogi, a series of 4 interconnected tales that are the most purely mythological in the collection. They revolve around the lives and adventures of a few central characters, particularly the hero Pryderi. The first branch, Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, introduces us to the Welsh otherworld, Anwen. The story begins when Pwyll, while hunting, encounters the strange, otherworldly hounds of Aron, the king of Anwen. This leads to a pact where Pwyll and Aron magically switch appearances and rule each other's kingdoms for a year and a day. Pwyll successfully defeats Aron's enemy and, crucially, respects Aron's wife, sleeping in her bed for a year with his back turned to her. This act of honor forges a lasting friendship between the 2 kings and establishes a link between the mortal world and the otherworld. This branch also tells the story of Pwyll's marriage to the powerful and mysterious Rhiannon, a horse goddess figure from the otherworld. Their son, Pryderi, is mysteriously stolen on the night of his birth, and Rhiannon is falsely accused of killing him, forced to suffer a humiliating punishment until the boy is eventually found and restored. The second branch, Bronwyn, daughter of Lear, is a tragic tale of diplomacy gone wrong. Bronwyn is married to the King of Ireland to forge an alliance, but she is cruelly mistreated. Her giant brother, Bronn the Blessed, a figure so immense he can wade across the Irish Sea, leads a massive Welsh army to rescue her. The ensuing war is catastrophic, leading to the near-total destruction of both the Irish and the Welsh. Bronn himself is mortally wounded by a poisoned spear. He commands his surviving men to cut off his head and carry it back with them. For 87 years, the head remains magically alive, providing them with joyful companionship, a powerful symbol of the Celtic belief in the head as the seat of the soul. This story is a dark and profound meditation on the fragility of peace and the devastating cost of war. The third branch, Manawydan, son of Lir, follows the aftermath of this disaster. Pryderi and his mother Rhiannon return to a land that has been magically enchanted and laid to waste. The story becomes a tale of survival and ingenuity, as they and their companions must learn new crafts to survive, eventually outwitting the magician who has cursed their lands, and restoring their world to fruitfulness. The fourth branch, Math, son of Mathanoe, is a complex story of magic, betrayal, and transformation, set in the kingdom of Gwynedd. It revolves around the great magician king Math and his nephew, the trickster figure Gwydion. The most famous episode involves Gwydion and Math magically creating a woman from flowers, oak, broom, and meadowsweet, to be a wife for Gwydion's nephew, Leo Laugifes. This beautiful flower maiden is named Blodeuwedd. However, she falls in love with another man and conspires to kill Leu. Leu, who can only be killed under a bizarre and highly specific set of circumstances, is betrayed and transformed into an eagle. Gwydion eventually finds him, restores him to human form, and, as a punishment, turns Blodeuwedd into an owl, a creature of the night, forever shunned by other birds. Beyond the four branches, the Mabinogion contains other important tales. Culhwch and Olwen is one of the earliest Arthurian tales in existence, a wild and fantastic story where the hero Culhwch must complete a series of impossible tasks, like hunting the great boar Turch Truith, to win the hand of the giant's daughter Olwen. It presents an early, more mythologically rooted version of King Arthur and his court, filled with warriors who have magical abilities. There are also three later Arthurian romances, Owen, or the Lady of the Fountain, Peredur, son of Evrog, and Geraint and Enid, which show a stronger influence from the French chivalric tradition. The world of the Mabinogion is dreamlike and often stark. The characters' motivations can be opaque, and events happen with a strange, folkloric logic. Yet it is a world rich with powerful themes, the fluid boundary between our world and the other world, the immense power and agency of its female characters like Rhiannon and Bronwyn, the importance of honor and keeping one's word, and the constant presence of magic, transformation, and enchantment. It is a cornerstone of Welsh literature and a vital part of the broader Celtic mythological heritage, offering a unique and hauntingly beautiful vision of the ancient past.